Today, it's old school altered body work secrets for Project Rolling Thunder. Now that Ryan has pushed our racetrack Ford Ranger's front axle forward by 6 inches, it's up to Kevin to make the fenders fit. It's all today here on Trucks.
Hey guys, welcome to Trucks. Today, we're back on Project Rolling Thunder, our supercharged 4.6-liter V8 6-speed manual transmission equipped compact pickup truck. Now this thing's also got an 03 Mustang Cobra independent rear suspension, custom front suspension, and some pretty big brakes up front. Now we did all this with the end goal of having this little Ford pickup handle more like a Mustang. And a big part of that is weight balance. Now it's no secret that all pickup trucks are extremely weight biased towards the front of the vehicle. So to alleviate that problem, we had 2 choices. We could move the engine and transmission back into the cab, do some major firewall surgery, or we could move the front suspension forward, essentially having the same effect. And that's the route we took. And while it did help with weight balance, well, it also created another problem. And that problem is the front tire is going to want to occupy the same real estate as the fender. And it looks like we're going to have to come in here and trim some of this inner structure as well. Not only that, we're going to have this vast expanse behind the front wheel. But in the long run, it'll all be worth it and pay off big time. And even better yet, well, it's not my problem. That's right, the problem's mine. And by the outward appearance, it looks like a big one because the inner structure is no big deal. We can trim it out, we can even tub it like the mini truck guys do. But the outside, not so much. We got a little bit of space here and nothing here. If we were going in a straight line and never ever steering, maybe not such a problem, but this truck is going to go autocrosses, it's going to go twisties and windies. We need to have lock-to-lock clearance on the tires, obviously. Now, what we can do is actually a very simple solution. And since this is a single-walled sheet metal panel, it's going to be quite easy to do. Just hang in there and we'll show you. The other thing is, these LMC panels are nice quality stamping and they're relatively inexpensive at just under $100 a piece. So what we're going to do is show you how to sacrifice an additional fender, move your wheel arch forward, do a nice butt weld, metal finish it, and by outward appearances, you're never going to know the difference. With the gap set and the fender locked into place, we can start the trimming process, which begins with the wheel arch, since it's flared out and we actually need a flat surface to work against. Now with the second fender on a bench top, I can start trimming for the patch. Now keep in mind, I'm trimming way past my actual cut line. Now the reasons for this are going to be clear in about a minute, but trust me, you want to cut past where you actually want to slice and section your fender in. On the door gap, I'm cutting 1/4 of an inch in. This gives me a flat part of the panel that I can butt weld against the other fender. The inner fender brace is also trimmed so it doesn't interfere. Now here's where it becomes crystal clear exactly what we're doing. We're taking a page out of the old school altered wheelbase drag car book and literally moving the wheel arch forward to match the new location of the wheel center line. Now right now at this step, it's not an exact science, so you want to trim a little at a time. Once you're happy with the overall look and feel of the new wheel arch location, well, here's where I mark the spots and then I can double check with a plumb line later. My masking tape is going to hold the fender in place while I measure. If you got an extra set of hands, well, you can use a buddy. Ryan's hiding right now. My plumb line shows me the exact axle center line, and this way I can literally measure the wheel arch and center up the fender. I'm also using the upper style line as a guide. And once I'm happy with the location, I'm using self-drilling Phillips head screws we got from Industrial Depot to lock my new wheel arch into place.
Now with it screwed into place, I can literally step back and double check the proportion, because even though the measuring tape said it's centered, it still has to look right.
Up next, we'll fit these two fender pieces together to make one seamless body panel. And later, Kevin will do away with the ugly rear bumper and smooth it all out with a roll pan. Stay tuned.
Hey, welcome back to Trucks. We're working on our altered wheelbase Ford Ranger, but it's not an altered wheelbase in the traditional sense. Ours is for weight transfer, but it's a different type, since Ryan has moved the axle center line forward 5 inches to literally cheat the engine weight back and get a better balance with the truck. So my job was to move the fenders and match that wheelbase. So we're using 2 fenders to make one, and sacrificing both of them, moving the wheel arch forward 5 inches to match the axle center line. So we're almost ready to start cutting and trimming for our final fit so we can weld it up. But check this out. You'll notice that the styline valley on this upper fender is slightly lower than the one on the bottom fender. That's not a mistake, it's intentional. Here's why. The width of my blade is going to come into play. It's 40 thousandths, and when I make my cut across the top through both panels, some metal's going away, at least 40 thousandths of an inch. And when I draw my panels together for a nice butt weld, a flush fit, well, these style lines are then going to match. So it's compensating for the width of the blade. And that way, I get a nice perimeter fit with very little gap that I don't have to fill up with a bunch of weld. Now for this procedure, I'm cutting both panels with a single cut. And I'm starting from the inside, which does a couple of things for me. It shows me exactly where I need to make my cut from the outside and not overcut. And it also gives me a precise cut of both panels. Now I'm marking my cut lines on the outside with blue fine line tape and doing a reinforcement trace with a silver ink pen. This way, if the tape goes away, I still have a cut line. Now we've sped the video up for obvious time reasons, but trust me, I'm not forcing the blade, and you don't want to either. Let the blade find a natural progression on its own. That way you're not going to distort the metal or prematurely wear your blades out. Now here's where you remove fender number 2 and carefully set it aside. Then you can take the skin of fender number 1 and say goodbye forever. Now you can test fit your new wheel arch. Once you're happy with the fit, you can clean up the outside. But notice I'm not trimming too much of the E-coat off. This can help you with sighting and your bodywork later on. Now magnets and clamps hold things in place while I get rough tacks set down and lock everything into its final position. But I'm not going to finish weld things just yet. Okay, with our section fender mounted securely on the Matco Superstand, there's a couple of things I wanted to show you before I continue with the welding process. Remember the line that I drew in the valley of this body style line, where the insert panel was obviously lower than the original fender that we're using as our basis. Now, since I compensated for the width of the blade, now these lines match up perfectly, so a little bit of forethought goes a long way with a project like this. Now here's the beauty of cutting both panels with one blade at the same time. Look at my fit. It's literally perfect. It's almost impossible to make a mistake cutting like this, and it sets it up for a perfect union of both pieces of single wall sheet metal. And if you had cut them independently and constantly trimmed, sooner or later you're going to ruin your fit and ruin both panels. Now all we have to battle is heat. Now the process of tacking and finish welding starts, but you'll notice I'm not welding very far or very much before I come in with the hammer and dolly. This gives you the opportunity to put your metal back where it wants to be and eliminate the heat damage that you've created with the tack welds. You can keep control over your sheet metal by stopping and starting and sighting. It's also where leaving your E-coat, or as much of it as possible, in place helps, because even though it's not shiny like paint, it still has a bit of a gloss, and you can literally read the surface and tell where your distortion is. Now with sheet metal, you want to stagger your welds as much as possible, jump around and keep the space between them, until you finally have a continuous weld made up of your individual tacks, and then you can proceed to flush fitting or grinding the welds flat. Now, I'm using a 24 grit disc on an angle grinder, and even with the video sped up, you can see what a light touch I'm using, because you can generate almost as much heat with a grinder as you can with a welder, so be careful. Hey, welcome back. Well, after some more welding and a lot more hammer and dolly work, our Fender is finally ready for a skim coat of filler and then primer and finally paint. And as you can see, the proportion doesn't look goofy and it fits with our stretched wheelbase perfectly. But there's still one more sheet metal project we're going to do today. And that is putting a roll pan on the back of Rolling Thunder. Now, this is a steel roll pan, and it came from LMC Truck, and it ships with all the hardware it takes to bolt it in place. Or you can weld it in. Finish the welds out for a nice, cool custom look. I'll give you one guess as to what we're going to do. The stamped holes in the roll pan are the perfect place to tack it to the bed. Grinding the surface of the paint off is going to give me a good solid weld, and the Duplicolor weld-through primer gives me some corrosion protection. Panel clamps hold things in place until I can weld, and then I can install the tailgate and double check my fit. Super, thank you. With the top of the roll pan held in place, now we can fit against the bed sides. And like any used vehicle, this one's had a couple of prior repairs. The passenger side, well, we could just tack that into place and fit it in later. But the driver's side, well, you can see the filler we uncovered and there's an excessive gap. So we're going to use another old school custom trick and use a piece of TIG rod. Back in the day, they literally used coat hangers to fill in these gaps, but it's the same principle. You're basically using a filler metal and tacking it into your sheet metal to fill up the gap instead of cheating and using plastic filler. This is a process, again, of controlling your heat, so make sure you take your time between tacks and let your weld pool cool down. Now, what I'm doing right now might seem like breaking my own rules, but here's why I can get away with it. The roll pan itself is a heavy gauge sheet metal. The bed side is a corner. Both panels are curved. Now, all of those three things together give you a lot of strength, even with single wall sheet metal. So you can pour a little more heat to it and stack up your welds like I'm doing here without a lot of distortion. And with the gap finally filled, you can grind your welds flush, and it gets you ready for a skim coat of body filler. Now, on the other side, we had a lot better gap with a much smaller space, so I can keep my welds a lot smaller. This, of course, minimizes any distortion and allows you to control your weld much better. Now, after the welding's done, just like on the Fender project, I'm using a 24 grit grinding disc. Now, that's a very, very aggressive tooth for grinding, but it actually helps to keep the metal cool because it removes much more material with a lot less effort. A fiber wheel cleans the weld contamination up, and we're ready for filler.
Ta-da! Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Well, Kevin's got some epoxy primer sprayed out on the freshly stretched Fender. Now it's ready for body work. Now, I gotta say, once this thing's under final paint, I doubt you'd ever be able to tell that that Fender's been modified. Now, we've been pushing this truck around the shop on a mismatched set of wheels just to keep it mobile and allow us to move it around. But now we're ready for the real set of tires and wheels. We picked up these beautiful forged 18 by 10 inch 3-piece wheels from True Forged. Now, the hoops themselves are rotary forged and fired, and the center section is bolt-in, and it's cut from a solid chunk of forged billet. Now, this is their formula style. We went with polished spokes and a polished lip. But their online wheel editor has hundreds of choices. You can choose the style, trim finish, sizes, and offset. Now, as far as rubber goes, these are 295 3518 BFG KDWs. And this is actually a pretty wide tire. In fact, it's just slightly narrower than the 305 35 that's on the mock-up wheel. But as wide as this tire is, well, it's for the front. That's because we got some serious rubber for the back end of this truck. I'm talking Corvette and Viper territory here. These 335/30/18s are wrapped around an 18 by 11.5-inch wheel. Now they've got a great looking directional tread pattern, good soft tread compound, and enough voids and siping to provide decent traction in the wet and great traction in the dry. These things ought to do great out on the street. Not to mention, they're gonna leave some pretty nasty looking wide stripes on the road when we dump the clutch in this truck at 5,000 RPM.
Now that is one wicked stance. So you can go to trueforgedwheels.com and design your own 2- or 3-piece fully custom wheels, or check out their new line of cast wheels for even more options. For us, now we got to design some kind of custom front air dam with a splitter, since this piece of machinery is definitely going to see some track time. Love this stuff.
Today, we're back on Project Rolling Thunder. We're adding power and fuel lines in the chassis, and we're making our own custom aero body mods for style and brake cooling. It's all today here on Trucks.
Hey guys, welcome to Trucks. Well, today we're back on Project Rolling Thunder. And I'm gonna take a wild guess that you guys are getting kind of tired of seeing this thing as a rolling chassis with a drivetrain stuffed in it. Frankly, we are too. We're ready to make some progress on this long-term project we've got. Now, the big pieces are there: the engine, transmission, drive shaft, rear suspension, the brakes are on, and it's rolling on a nice set of tires and wheels. So now it's down to some of the little things. Oh, kind of like adding the engine wiring harness, bolting this big boy supercharger down, adding some ignition coils, the front end accessory drive parts, as well as running fuel lines and battery cables. And that is part of what we're going to do today.
We've also been busy on the body. Now, you've seen us do the Ranger conversion on the front end of the Mazda B2500. You've also seen us do the altered wheelbase trick with the 2 sets of fenders to accommodate the 5-inch forward movement of the axle center point. And you haven't seen the wide body trick that we're doing on the bed to accommodate that giant rear wheel and tire combo. But here's something that we're going to show you today. This right here is the factory mirror. It sits right there in the door. Nothing really wrong with it, but it just looks a little pedestrian. So we want a little more high performance feel. This is a mirror base plate made out of 20 gauge sheet metal. We're going to show you how to make this today. What that accommodates is very cool. We found a company called APR. They make carbon fiber mirrors, inlet ducts, splitters, very cool stuff for the aftermarket. This mirror is going to sit right here. They also provided us with some air inlet ducts. We're going to figure out where these go. But today's project, showing you how to make that.
But first, we're going to get started running the fuel lines. Now we're going to secure them to the IRS subframe using a clamp and a hole that we've drilled and tapped. And to protect the lines going into the frame rail, we're using our split vacuum hose trick that we used before. And we got to keep in mind we've got to add a fuel filter to this fuel system, but we'll hide that in the frame rail later. And to protect the lines from getting full of metal shavings, rust, and debris, we've taped the end shut. Now to provide an out location for our fuel line, we're just using a small hole saw and a carbide burr to create a hole coming out of the frame rail near the engine bay. We'll make sure it's free of any sharp edges later. Now you guys probably noticed we went with something a little bit different when we chose our fuel line. This is the Pro Classic hose from Russell Performance. It's got a few advantages over the stainless steel braided line that's almost become an industry standard in high performance applications. Now this Pro Classic hose, well, it's a braided nylon cover over top of a liner that's capable of withstanding up to 350 psi. And it's impervious to oil, water, and antifreeze, making this stuff the perfect application for almost any plumbing situation on your vehicle. Now with the stainless line, to cut it, you've got to wrap it in tape first. You get loose steel ends that want to poke you in the finger, and the fittings can be difficult to assemble, especially if you don't have the special tools. Now the Pro Classic hose, well, it's much more flexible. It's lighter than this steel stuff, and the fittings can be hand assembled. Now to get electricity from our relocated Optima battery up to the front of the truck, we're going to be using a product that we showed you not too long ago. This is Excel's Lightning cable. It's basically copper-coated aluminum strands, making this battery cable much lighter than standard battery cables. Notice a theme here? We're after high performance, and the lighter the truck, the better. Now the cable alone is nice, but it's not going to get the job done. So you obviously need battery terminals, and these screw-on types are the ones we like to use. Now they're great on their own, but we also like to add heat shrink tubing. It helps solidify the connection, and it just gives a nice, professional and clean appearance. Now for a little extra insurance, we're adding some braided cover over top of the insulation on the battery cable. That'll prevent any sharp edges from cutting through the insulation to the conductive wire and shorting out the battery. Now the loop we've added that goes up around the shifter handle, well, that's just there to gauge how much length we need, because we're going to be running a battery cutoff switch inside the cab. And that's just a safety precaution, because this truck is going to see some track time. Now with the supercharger in place, we're running into an issue that stresses the importance of mock-up. While mock-up does kind of seem like you're just doing things twice and wasting time, well, it usually saves time in the long run. And that's essentially what we're doing today. Both these fuel hoses and the battery cable will come back out of the frame rails so the frame can be painted. We just want to make sure everything's looking good and about the right length. Now both the fuel hoses and the battery cables were cut long. That way we can trim them to fit once we determine their exact length. Now the issue we're running into with the fuel rails may apply to some of you guys that run these overhead cam Ford engines and aftermarket fuel rails. The threaded end on the fuel rail is really close to the metal coolant passage, especially once you add the necessary adapter. Now, even with just enough room to get a fitting in here, well, we'd still have to come up with a flex line to get over top of the supercharger or underneath it to the passenger side fuel rail. And, well, there's not a whole lot of room for a fitting there either. Not to mention, any other tubes running across the top of the supercharger just wouldn't look very good. So we've got a pretty slick solution that's going to eliminate the need for a fuel crossover tube going from one fuel rail to the other. Simply come in here with this aluminum fitting that we picked up from Russell and use it to plug each end of the front of the fuel rails. Then we'll take our fuel pressure regulator and install it in line, but prior to the rails. We'll come out of one side of the regulator into a Y fitting and feed each rail individually. Now I know you're probably saying, isn't the fuel pressure regulator supposed to go after the fuel rails? And you're right, that's the way it has been done for years and years. But a lot of fuel systems are coming from the factory with the fuel pressure regulator part of the filter assembly or even attached to the pump and in the tank. So if it's good enough for the new 5.0 Mustang, it's good enough for our 4.6.
Hey, welcome back. Well, we're going to do a very cool project, hand-forming sheet metal. And it might look complicated, but it's not. Trust me. What we're going to start with is our original equipment mirror. Like we showed you, we want to get sexier, put the carbon fiber mirrors on, and these guys have to go away. But this can still be used as a pattern. What we're going to do is form a buck, form the sheet metal around it, and then trim to fit the door. It starts out with a sheet of 3/8" MDF. And we're going to make a 3-piece buck. Give us versatility. What we do here is you've got a left, a right, and a center for support. We need the depth because the contours of the door dictate that we have to have that thickness. So this gives us the ability to make both sides off of one buck. Starts with the centerpiece as a pattern. Obviously, that fits the mirror base. This fits in the inside of our door and gives us a place to start. MDF, or medium density fiberboard, is cheap and it's also easy to form. I didn't use a router to make this piece, just a grinder. You want to make sure you have plenty of edge to work with, so I'm marking my workpiece and marking about 3/4 to an inch around the actual buck. That way, I've got lots of room for fitment. Using my Woodward Fab tools, I'm just cutting and trimming the edges off. You could do this with hand shears. You want to make sure that your workpiece is locked to the sheet metal in one place. So I'm using some screws with pre-drilled holes to lock it in place. Then you can start forming metal, which starts with some relief cuts to make sure that the corners bend. A little bit of pressure with the hammer shows you where your buck sits, and then you can start to work your angles. Now your metal will tell you when it's tired of moving and when it's time for more relief cuts. This is a process that when you pay attention, the tone of the metal tells you things, the resistance of the metal tells you things, even the feel of your hammer tells you when to progress or when you need to make more relief cuts and conform the metal to the shape that you want. Depending on what you're working on, you're gonna know when your basic shape has been achieved, and then you can release the steel from the buck. Now with the wooden buck out of the way, you can really start to refine your project, which starts with welding the relief cuts and making it one solid piece of steel again. That way you can form against the welds and use the tension of the metal to your advantage. Now I'm using a spoon here to hammer against and give me a little bit tighter gap. I'm using my Miller-Matic 140 with a 25 thousandths diameter wire, which gives me a small heat affected zone. The masking tape just gives me a nice straight guide when I'm removing the excess metal. That's followed by some more relief cuts because we're going to roll the front edge over and make it look like a factory stamped piece, which is done again with a spoon and a sheet metal hammer, slowly with even pressure and an eye on what you're doing. And you can see that the mirror base is nearly done. However, the finished piece compared, we still have a little bit more trimming and tweaking to do, but we can do that up against the vehicle. The point is, with a simple buck, a few simple hand tools, a little bit of perseverance, and asking your metal nicely to do what you want it to do, you can get there from here and you can make cool projects on your own. Hey, welcome back. We've got a mirror base plate bolted to the door and the APR carbon fiber mirror screwed in and bolted to the mirror faceplate. Here's how we attached it. Simple, just like the project. We used some 1/4-20 bolts from the industrial depot bin, tack welded them to the back side in the same configuration as the original plastic mirror. From the outside, you can't tell they're there, so you've got all the freedom in the world for placement of your mirror to where you can see the best. From the inside, well, it's a factory attachment. Now here's why we wanted to stay with the Mazda bedsides instead of going full-on Ranger conversion like we did on the nose. Mazda engineered this bulge into the side of the bed, so we worked off of that, sliced it, added another inch on the outside, removed all the bracing, rolled the edge back, added another 2 inches of tire clearance on these bedsides. Now we sacrificed rigidity along here. The way we built it back is by using 1/4-inch steel rod, making a perimeter here, giving us a nice smooth edge so we won't ever cut a tire. But here's another modification. This is a chunk I cut out of the bedside, and it's pretty obvious where it went. The bulge went down this way. Here's what we're doing. We're going to create a functional air inlet duct that's going to go to a ducted tubing to cool the brakes. It's going to be very simple. It's going to draw air off of the outside of the body, duct it in. Because your brakes heat up, they go away. Project materials are inexpensive. 3-inch exhaust tube on 20-gauge sheet metal and a simple hole saw on a hand drill. What you're doing is trimming to fit and sinking your exhaust tube into the duct where you want the air directed. Trimming around the outside edge, well, we opted for a plasma cutter, but you could also do this with a pair of snips or a grinder. All right, so now we've achieved our goal of taking outside air and pushing it inside of the wheel arch, inside of the bedside. This is obviously not finished. We're going to cover this over and make a cool scoop, which starts with 20-gauge flat stock. Obviously, that doesn't look very good, so we're going to dome this. And that ends up looking like this after a few minutes on the English wheel. And it ends up making a nice cover with a cool rounded edge. Now, we want to finish this edge off. 2 ways you can do that. Just like we showed you on the mirror base, you can make a buck and hammer form it around. Or you can do exactly what we did on the inside of the wheel arch, take some 1/4-inch steel rod, hand bend it, and it makes a nice radius, makes a nice curved inside edge here, so that by the time you've got it painted, primed, welded back in place, it's a cool, sexy look that looks finished. It looks like a factory stamping. Now, just because we've got air going into the bedside doesn't mean it's going exactly where we want it to. We don't want it just to bounce around inside there. We want to control that air, force it onto the back side of the rotor, just like Carroll Shelby did. The way we're going to do that is very cool. Check this out. Now, just like up front here, we're going to be using functional brake cooling ducts by a company called Agent 47. Agent 47 is best known for their Fox Body Mustang high-performance road race products, which is perfect for our front suspension since, if you remember, we're using SN95 or Mustang front spindles. Since this system bolts right onto these spindles, it's absolutely a perfect shoe-in and a great project for this truck. The high-strength, heat-resistant corrugated tubing will allow us to duct anywhere we want to, which we're going to go into our new front fascia and finish off with these air inlet ducts, which we got from APR, who also supplied us with the custom carbon fiber race mirrors. Now, since this thing is going to get us from 0 to 60 in about 4 seconds, we want to make sure this thing stops as well as it goes. Cooling your brakes keeps your brakes. Hey guys, welcome back to Trucks. Well, as you can see, our air induction scoop is looking pretty cool. There's still some work to do. We've got some trimming and welding and then filling and then blocking and priming, etc. However, it's going to look cool, but more importantly, this is not some tacky scoop that we've thrown onto the side of the bodywork. This sucker is functional. It's going to really help with performance and keeping the brakes cool. Now, you guys that know Rangers, you know that the fuel door used to go there. As a matter of fact, here it is. This fuel door, well, we're going to keep it because it's flat. We can use this in some other custom project. So that is going on the shelf. And this, for now, I don't know, we're pretty happy with the progress. Tell us what you think.
Now, most of what we set out to do today, we've accomplished. We've got fuel lines run, the superchargers bolted down, the engine wiring harness installed, we've got our coil packs dropped in, and we've added most of our front engine accessory drive components. But we ran into a little bit of a problem. These 03 and 04 Cobra engines were designed to go in a Mustang, and they had enough room for the alternator, which was supposed to go right here. Our problem is we got a frame rail and suspension in the way. Now, if you remember, we've gotten rid of the air conditioning on our Ranger, which means we don't have to run an AC pump, which left some vacant real estate on the lower passenger side. So that's where we found a home for our alternator. Now, we just made a custom bracket to locate it, and it's just made out of 1/8" plate and 18-gauge sheet metal. Now, the sheet metal, we've added a dimple die to, and that does a couple of things. Makes it look nicer, and it adds strength. Here's how you make one. Now, the die itself has 2 halves, and the material you're working with gets sandwiched in between the two. Now, it doesn't take a whole lot of pressure to form the dimple, especially on the thin stuff. And just like that, you've got a dimple-dyed piece of sheet metal. Now, this is kind of thin material just for this demonstration, but it shows that the dimple adds another dimension to this otherwise flat piece of steel, and that's where it gets its strength. Now, this isn't a scientific test, just a demo. We wanted to show you it actually makes a difference. That one there. Same size steel, same hole. Well, you tell me.
Today, Project Rolling Thunder is getting a layer of heat insulation under the cab, and we'll need it to cut down the heat from our new exhaust system. It's all today here on Trucks.
Hey guys, welcome to Trucks. Well, we've got Project Rolling Thunder back in the shop today. Now, this is kind of an ambitious project. We're taking an X4-cylinder, 5-speed Mazda B2500 and essentially turned it into a truck version of a Mustang. Now, this thing's going to end up being a really fast and great-looking street truck, but it's also something we're going to be able to take to the racetrack. And despite the really wide rear tires, I'm not talking about the drag strip either. We're talking about an autocross or a road course, somewhere we can really stretch the legs of this pickup truck and kind of get into some triple-digit speeds legally. We want to be able to test the power, suspension, brakes, and traction of our little Ford Ranger. But we're going to need an exhaust system first, so that's one of the projects we're going to be working on today.
The other project we're going to do today is deal with the byproduct of all of that power, heat. And I don't know about you, but riding around feeling like a burrito in a microwave is not my idea of having a good time on the racetrack. So we're going to deal with that problem. But we're not going to stack up a whole bunch of heat insulation tiles because, number one, they weigh a lot. And we're conserving weight on this truck, trying to keep the whole entire vehicle weight down. So we're going to show you guys how to use a product that is easy to prep, and get it just about anywhere, and doesn't weigh very much. Lizard skin. So why all the cardboard? Well, those of you who've been watching trucks for a long time, you might remember the '67 Chevy pickup Project Copperhead. Well, I painted that truck, top and bottom. And the way we're going to shoot the lizard skin insulation on the bottom of this truck is the same way I shot the floor pan, with the truck tipped back on the back of its cab. Cardboard, of course, is to protect the sheet metal. Work smarter, not harder.
Who put that thing in the way? That's one way to clean it out.
Thanks, guys. Now, there's a couple of things you notice right away with the cab stood up on end. The first one is, well, we've got a really good rust-free cab. The second one is this. That's the factory sealer. There's absolutely no sound or heat insulation on the bottom of this cab. And with the truck being low, the exhaust heat is just going to radiate up into the cab. So we're going to do something about that. We're going to scuff the entire bottom with these scuffing pads, and it's also going to give us the opportunity to give it a bit of a cleaning. The red scuffing pads you will find in every body shop on the planet, and they're the perfect tool for prepping this bottom since it's an inconsistent surface with lots of gaps. The prep solvent we're using for final wipe is also a body shop staple, but we got ours from Duplicolor, which means you can get it at just about any automotive retail store in the country. And it's always a great idea to chase out any solvents from your pinch welds or gaps with a little compressed air. Now, rarely does something high-tech come in a paste, but that's exactly what Lizard Skin is. It's a sprayable, water-based thermal barrier that's filled with ceramic particles. And just like your ceramic-coated headers keep the heat from out of the engine bay, this stuff keeps the heat from out of the cab. It's safe to use, it's environmentally friendly with easy cleanup, and it's even easier to spray if you use a kit that they also offer. The kit includes this siphon feed gun, which is all we're going to need today because of the way our workpiece is set up. But they also have this hose attachment that allows you to get inside door frames and tight crevices. And this attachment here that allows you to drop it down into the bucket, attach a piece of hose the length that you need to where you can work independently of the bucket with the gun body itself, if you've got a huge job. This is pretty necessary. This is included in the kit as well and allows you to stir up the paste and make it into a consistent format. Just attach it to a cordless drill and you're done. Now, it does require a little bit of safety equipment. It doesn't atomize or produce overspray, and it is water-based, but they do recommend that you wear a dust filter mask. Glasses come in handy if you're spraying upside down. We're not, so we don't need them. Now, we're going to do a little experiment today. Lizard Skin claims to be a lightweight thermal barrier, so the weight of the bucket is going to be measured before and after. Right now, it weighs in about 12 pounds. Now, we're masking for obvious reasons, to keep the Lizard Skin from going into places that we don't want it to go into. But it's not like a paint job, in the sense that all we need is 18 inches of masking paper to control the minimal overspray that we're going to have. The biggest thing we're masking for is the square chassis harness on the bottom of the cab and a couple of threaded bosses. Now, with the Lizard Skin mixed to the consistency of peanut butter, I've put it in the gun and I'm testing the gun pattern on a couple of places. Now, the gun, which comes in the kit, is a huge pressure-fed gun with a giant orifice. So the pattern is not going to be like a spray gun pattern. It's a round pattern and about 2 inches wide. But you can see how effective it is for this material. By the way, I've got my gun pressure set at 35 pounds at the inlet. Here, with the film in real time, you can see the thickness and consistency of the Lizard Skin paste. But that doesn't mean it's heavy. It's very light. The magic here is the ceramic particles that are loaded into the paste that literally deflect the heat from the surface that it's sprayed onto. We're going to be using 2 coats of the Lizard Skin on the bottom. The first coat is thick, the second coat is just as thick, which ends up giving us a consistent film and a nice, even texture. So now the bucket weighs 7 pounds. That means there's 5 pounds of material gone from the bucket. Just for the sake of argument, let's say we wasted a pound from cleanup, overspray, and overmix. So that means we've got 4 pounds of additional weight on the vehicle, on the floor pan. 4 pounds to give us a 30% reduction in interior temperatures. And everybody knows that less weight means the same thing as more horsepower. Hey, welcome back to Trucks. Well, our thermal barrier coating looks great. However, it tends to be a little bit porous. So we're going to give it an extra coat of paint to make it look a little bit better, but also keep dirt and road grime from getting caught up in the texture of the coating.
And I'm going to suit up so I don't breathe the stuff in, okay?
Now, even though the Lizard Skin looks great, it's really not designed as a top coat. So a coat of paint is really going to help seal the surface, seal it away from dirt, debris, and moisture penetrating the coating. The paint we chose is Duplicolor's engine enamel in semi-gloss black. It's easy to use, it looks great with a nice eggshell sheen, and it's got the same temperature rating as the lizard skin itself, 500 degrees.
Well, now that Kevin's got the floor of the Ranger completely insulated, we can move on with the installation of the parts that are going to make the heat in the first place, the exhaust system. Now, during stage 1 of this build, well, we built an exhaust system using a pair of MagnaFlow mufflers and some tubing we had around the shop using the bender we've got here. The problem is that bender doesn't produce mandrel bends, so we wanted to upgrade and replace the non-mandrel bent tubing with some mandrel bent stuff that flows a little bit better and can support the higher horsepower levels this new engine's going to produce. So to do that, we picked up a universal kit from MagnaFlow. Now, this 2.5-inch universal stainless steel pipe kit includes J-bends, 45s, 90s, plenty of straight exhaust pipe, ball and socket flanges, as well as about half a dozen exhaust hangers and a pair of O2 sensor bungs. So you've got everything you need to complete the system. Now, speaking of which, while this stuff isn't cheap, you can usually get an entire exhaust system out of it, sometimes two. So if you play your cards right, you can stretch your dollar. Now, we also picked up a pair of 2.5-inch stainless steel mufflers from MagnaFlow. Now, these have a straight-through design. There's no baffles and no restrictions, so they should provide plenty of exhaust flow. Now, to complement this stuff, we're going to be running an X-pipe, but we're not sure which style will suit our application best. Now, there's a number of benefits for running an X-pipe. We'll get more into that later. Now, beyond all this new, shiny exhaust stuff, we're also going to be reusing some of our old parts. Right over here. Now, if you remember, our exhaust system starts with a pair of 04 Mustang Cobra manifolds. They flow a surprising amount of air, and they're going to save us from having to fabricate a custom set of headers that we probably don't have room for anyway. Now, we're going to be reusing our high-flow stainless steel catalytic converters. They don't have that many miles on them. It just makes sense to reuse them. Same story with our O2 sensors. Now, here's an example of a non-mandrel bent piece of exhaust tubing. Not exactly what you would consider show car or race car material. We are not going to be reusing these. Hey guys, welcome back. Well, with Project Rolling Thunder up on the lift and at a reasonable working height, we can get started on our custom stainless steel exhaust system. And, well, frankly, we've talked about it enough, so time to work. Now, the driver's side frame rail is awfully close to the output of the exhaust manifold. But we were able to sneak an exhaust pipe in there. And if we need to, we can go back later and relief cut the frame rail and plate it in, if we need to. For now, we're going to say it's good enough. Now, like we said, we were going to be reusing our catalytic converters. And we found the perfect home for them right on either side of the transmission. And that'll lead into the X-pipe. And you can see which style we chose. Now, an X-pipe has a few benefits. It'll change the overall sound of the engine and the exhaust by smoothing out the exhaust pulses. It'll also reduce the overall sound coming from the exhaust by a few decibels. And while that doesn't sound like much, your neighbors will certainly appreciate it, and it can make a difference if you're driving your car or truck at a racetrack that has noise restrictions. Cool. Looking good?
Yep.
An X-pipe also has a scavenging effect, meaning that when one downpipe's exhaust pulse passes through the X-pipe, it helps pull the opposite downpipe's exhaust pulse through. Now, we're just tacking this system together using our MIG welder, because it's quick and easy, but we'll go back later with a TIG welder for a nicer and cleaner appearance. Now, even though this is a performance truck and performance first, well, there's no reason it can't look good at the same time. And even though it's not going to be seen very often, we wanted the exhaust system to be as symmetrical as possible. Now, the exhaust hangers came from the local parts store. And we ended up having the perfect mounting location for them using this rear cross member. Now, typically, they're held in place by a U-bolt, but we wanted a cleaner look, so we ended up welding them directly to the muffler. we're gonna take the easy way out, because I don't even want to think about running the exhaust through the IRS and past the fuel tank. Plus, exhaust out of the side of the truck just looks and sounds cool. All right, our exhaust system is completely mocked up, and we've got the tailpipes sticking out of each side of the truck in front of the rear tires. But we don't want to finalize their position until we get the bed back down on the frame so we can correctly position the tailpipes. We've also got to add our O2 sensors, an exhaust hanger or two, and we've got to figure out how to make this system removable. We can probably come in and make a cut along here, put it back together using a stainless steel band clamp. That way, the back half of the system is removable by itself, along with each downpipe and catalytic converter. Well, they can be removed individually.
Hey guys, welcome back to Trucks. Well, we're making a lot of progress on Project Rolling Thunder today. And while Ryan finishes up the TIG welding on the exhaust system, I wanted to show you what we've got left out of our MagnaFlow Universal Hot Rod Kit. Now, we've got a couple of good sections of straight pipe, a couple of 90s, what's left of a J-band, a 45, some miscellaneous scraps, ball and socket joints, heck, even some hangers left over. Essentially, we could almost make another exhaust system out of this. But remember, MagnaFlow also sells individual pieces. You can go to their website and pick them up, just enough to make up a system. So if you're working on more than one vehicle at a time, or you and your buddy want to split a setup, MagnaFlow may be the way to go for you for a mandrel band exhaust system. Now, with the exhaust system mounted in the frame, we're going to drop the bed back down onto the chassis and get a really good visual idea of how this thing's going to look finished. With the bed side sitting down here, you can kind of see where we're headed with the body mods. Metalwork, filler, and some of the priming and blocking is done. You can see that it's really starting to take shape with the custom body mods and the wide body bed sides. By the way, 335/30 series tires have plenty of room between the bed sides and the sidewall.
Now, it's a good thing we didn't weld the tailpipes into position before we dropped the bed down onto the frame. They'd be both pointing right at the bed sides. Not good. So we'll get those adjusted, put them where we want, throw some good-looking exhaust tips on there, and call this system done. Now, another objective we had with this truck was to make sure nothing hung below the bottom of the frame rail due to ground clearance issues, because the truck just sits so darn low, and luckily we were able to achieve that. Now, the exhaust system does sit nice and low in the chassis, which keeps the weight down low as well. Now, we still got to come in here and wrap heat insulation around the downpipes, catalytic converters, and we might throw some around the X-pipe section as well, just to try to keep heat off the drive shaft U-joint and the transmission output shaft seal. Now, on the other side of the frame, well, you can tell we've been working on the brake lines a little bit. And that started out as a coil or roll of 3/16 stainless steel line. And we had to straighten it out by hand. And while it did come out looking pretty good, well, during the process, we were thinking to ourselves, there has got to be a better way. And there is a better way. Now, you guys might know Classic Tube from their pre-bent brake lines, brake line fittings, and brake line supplies, but they also offer tools, like this brake line straightener. Here's how it works. Now, the process is pretty straightforward. Simply feed the tube or line into the tool and slowly work it back and forth. Then you can put a little bit more preload on the rollers as you go. Again, slowly working it back and forth. Once you see the tube start to take shape, well, you can work it until you're happy with how straight the line is. Well, you get the point. In less than a minute, we turned a 3 or 4 foot section of coiled stainless into a relatively straight piece of line. We didn't wear our thumbs out by straightening it, and we didn't put kinks every few inches in the process. So if you guys do a lot of custom fuel lines, brake lines, or transmission cooler lines, check out ClassicTube.com. Guys, thanks for watching Trucks. See you next week.
Today, after about 40 hours of work, we finally got a new roll cage and safety gear installed in Project Rolling Thunder. Our 01 altered wheelbase, low-slung, supercharged, 600-horse, track-ready Ford Ranger. We'll show you tips on building a cage, then we'll make room up front for our sticky 295/35s. It's all today here on Trucks.
Hey guys, welcome to Trucks. Well, we've got Project Rolling Thunder back in the shop and back under the knife. And according to you guys, well, Project Rolling Thunder is one of the most popular projects or builds that we've ever taken on. Now, ever since we completed stage 1 of this truck, which was a basically stock V8 and automatic and an otherwise stock Ranger pickup truck, we knew we wanted something a little bit more serious, something we can take to an autocross or a road course and really have some fun with. Now, since this is a compact pickup truck and it's relatively lightweight with some serious horsepower under the hood, we knew we needed some serious safety gear and a pretty robust roll cage. Now, while we can't show you the whole thing, because it would take 40 or 50 hours, we do want to show you some of the details and explain some of the thought behind the design. Check it out. Now, right from the beginning, we knew we were going to have to balance street truck and race truck for stage 2 of this build. And since this pickup's going to be capable of some pretty high speeds, we wanted to err on the side of caution and build a pretty robust and strong roll cage. Now, if you're building a cage to compete or race in a particular class, you need to follow the rule book set forth just for that class. But since this truck's not going to see wheel-to-wheel action or racing at all, we didn't have to worry about that too much. But we still took some cues from the rule book. The rules are there for a reason, and they usually make sense. So we want to share with you some general guidelines that you can use to build a nice, safe cage for just about anything. Now, steel tubing is strongest when it's straight, so you want to limit the number of bends you have in the main hoop, halo bars, A-pillar, and any other supporting tube work. Now, the driver's side door X-bars is an area we had to make a compromise. The strongest way to do it would be to run a straight tube from the main hoop harness bar junction down to the foot plate. But since we want to be able to use the armrest while riding around on the street, we put a bend in that tube, and that created a weak point. The solution to that problem was to put this supporting tube in that will support the bend and ties into the main hoop. Problem solved. Now, since triangles are one of the strongest shapes known to man, it makes sense that triangulation is the key to a good, strong cage. And you'll see lots of triangles in this cage design. Another thing you'll see lots of is intersecting joints and continuous load paths. Take this diagonal bar, for example. This tube runs up through the main hoop, through the halo bar, and down the A-pillar, making this one good, strong cage. Now, to provide an anchor point for the tubing, we added these foot plates. If we tried to weld directly to the thin sheet metal floor, it wouldn't take long at all for the weld to fatigue, crack, and fail. Not what you want. Now, the tubing itself is what's spec'd out in most rule books for a vehicle of this weight. It's got an outside diameter of 1.75 inches with a wall thickness of 0.120 inches, just shy of 1/8 of an inch. Now, the foot plates themselves, they are 1/8-inch plate, and they're contoured to fit the floor of the cab. Now, since this is a body-on-frame vehicle and the cab is bolted to the frame with 6 bolts, we want to take advantage of the added rigidity of the cab and increase the overall stiffness of the vehicle by anchoring the steel tubing to the frame itself. To do that, we just had the steel tubing pass through the floor plates with slugs on the outside that we can attach to the frame later. Now, one more thing we want to do to take advantage of the added rigidity from the cage and the cab is to tie it into the rear frame rails with some steel tubing. Now, we originally wanted to come up and tie it into the top of the main hoop, but that exposed roll cage tubing would kind of take away from the clean street truck look that we're after. So we thought a good compromise would to run the tubing through the back of the cab and tie in near the harness bar, and that'll just stiffen up and tighten up the entire chassis. Now, the A-pillar tubing disappears into the dash through the defrost vents, and they're tied together with a dash bar that runs underneath the steering column and behind the glove box. So needless to say, this dash isn't going anywhere. And speaking of tying things together, that's exactly what we did with this plate here. Tied the A-pillar tubing to the A-pillar sheet metal of the Ranger body, making the cab and cage one large structural unit. Plus, these plates kind of give it a cool race car look. Now, none of this would have been possible with the windshield and back glass in place. So keep that in mind if you're doing a project like this at home. Now, let's take a look at some of the safety stuff that's going inside this truck. Now, we knew we needed quite a few safety items, but we didn't want to go to a handful of different vendors to pick everything up. We kept it simple and got everything from Summit Racing, like this high-density roll bar padding, this fire extinguisher with this cool aluminum clamp, with a quick-release billet mount that bolts right to the floor of the truck, a wide-angle mirror complete with roll bar clamps, and an electrical cutoff switch. Now, regular cab pickup trucks are already short on room. Add in the fact that we've got a roll cage in ours, we've got even less room to work with. So our seating options were kind of limited. What we ended up going with was this aluminum seat that we picked up from Summit Racing. And it doesn't look that comfortable as it sits, and it's not, until you add the padded seat cover. Then it's actually quite comfortable. In fact, this is the same setup I run in my road race car, and I have no complaints with it. More important than the comfort is the bolsters that hold you in place, so you can concentrate more on driving and less on holding on for dear life.
Hey guys, welcome back to Trucks. Well, we've shown you the bed sides on Rolling Thunder before with the modified sheet metal, the 1/4-inch steel rod, and the induction scoops in the bed sides. But I wanted to thank Tim Strange for kicking around a little bit and helping us get these things into primer and doing some body work. It's really nice to have a skilled set of hands like his when we need help and he gets bored. But in case you haven't seen what we did underneath this layer of primer, here's the metal work involved. I found the center of the wheel arch and traced the line and started sectioning. Now the next cut I made was about 1 inch south of the valley that stamped into the bedside. And it gave me a flange to work with that also lets me retain this stamped corner, keep everything consistent and smooth looking. Now after I'd cut the inner structure out, it gave me the ability to pull the bedside out and expand all this metal and create the tire clearance that we needed, which gave me a gap of about 1 inch here and about 1 inch here. Now, filling in those gaps was a simple process of using 20-gauge sheet metal strips and just tacking them in place. And that gave us the clearance we need for full suspension cycle on these stupid wide tires. But it left the bedsides flimsy. That's where the 1/4-inch steel rod comes in. Just tacked it in place and finished the welds, gave the bedside back its strength. Now, it's one thing to walk you through it, talking about it, but we always want to show you guys what we do and how to do it. We've still got a huge problem on the front, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. Tell you how to get there from a bunch of cut up metal. Now up front with the wheel and tire locked about 2 inches above ride height, you can see with our altered wheelbase trick, we've got room for a lock-to-lock turn. However, at ride height or in suspension cycle, it's a different story. Okay, as the suspension cycles up, you get the picture. It gets ugly because obviously the sidewall is sticking way out. Even though this fender is trimmed and it's just a single wall and it's been flared out, there's not enough room for suspension cycle or even a lock-to-lock turn. So it's a pretty big problem, but it's one that can be solved. We're going to take the most basic and fundamental approach to expanding sheet metal, which is the pie cut. Cover up the expensive wheel. We're using a thin metal cutting blade we got from Industrial Depot to do the relief cuts. Now, what this allows me to do is to hand form the fender and contour it around my wheel without sacrificing the shape of the panel around the wheel lip. I've got an awful lot of time invested in the shape of the rest of the fender, and I don't want to sacrifice my previous work. All right, so we're going to trim a little more here. Make a relief cut there so we don't have a step. This is still in good shape. Now, it might look like I'm just shredding the fender, but there's a method to the madness, and we'll replace the strength later. All right, that gives me the tire clearance that I need for a lock-to-lock turn in suspension compression. However, this looks terrible. It's flimsy. That is not going to fly. It's not going to cut it. But this gives us the room we need. Now we build back the rigidity. The way we're going to do that is with 1/4-inch steel rod. This is available at any home hardware store, home center, or auto parts store sometimes, or you can buy your steel supplies online. The point is, it's cheap. This is about a $4 stick. Well, no, it's shorter. So it's about a $3 stick of steel. Let's try this. Okay, what you want to do is create a radius that goes around your wheel so you can tack it in place and give it support. Problem with that, my radius isn't round. It's got a peak there, and I'm going to end up making a mess. So here's an easy way to use what's right next to you to create your parts. We know the outside diameter of the wheel is exactly the radius that we want to put into the fender. So slowly use the tire and work it around like a die. You've heard me say this before. You're asking your steel or your metal to do what you want it to do. What that means is that you're not forcing anything, and you're listening or feeling your way through making a bend like this. All right, well, I've got my arch It's custom tailored to the wheel. Now, it's a matter of tracing, trimming, tack it in place, because you want the inside edge of this rolled steel up against the side of your tire. Just in case your wheel comes into contact with it, you don't cut a tire that way. Hey, welcome back. Well, we're liberating a little bit of room from these stock fenders to make room for the 295/35 series BF Goodrich KDWs mounted on our true forged wheels. They're sick wide, but looks like we're about ready. One thing I want to do is cycle the suspension and make sure we've got enough room. Now, I've got clearance here, but the steel rod that I'm going to put in as my wheel arch and the new edge is up about a 1/4 inch from there. So by the time this is locked in place, we'll have plenty of room for suspension travel, so we don't cut a tire, ruin our bodywork. With our 1/4 inch rod radius around the wheel itself, we actually use it as a template and trace around the single wall fender. This lets us use the strong points of the 1/4 inch steel rod, being that it's perfectly round and that it's quite strong. And again, we're going to cover up our expensive wheel while we make a lot of sparks. Next step is the very simple procedure of clamping the rod to the inside of the fender. Well, simple for some people. Hate when that happens. Okay, that's the stuff that you guys want to see that we never let you see. That's going in a show somewhere. So a slight strategy change, and I'm clamping it as I tack it. This also allows me to tack weld as I pull the fender out to where I wanted it to go. It has a tendency to return back to its original position, and you want to keep the flare where you designed it. If you've ever tried to MIG weld single wall sheet metal, especially late model panels, well, then you know you have the tendency to burn through quite easily. Well, here's a tip. Start your weld pool on the thicker piece of metal, then gradually ease it into the thin metal. Using that technique, you stand a lot less chance of blowing holes in your fender. And before we go too far, I wanted to cycle the wheel one more time just to check it for clearance. Now that's about as compressed as that wheel is ever going to get. And keep this in mind as well. Well, you can't see it, but I can. It's cambered out. We haven't done alignment on this thing yet, so it'll be tipped in even more. That's tons of clearance. So the only thing that's left is about 1 million tack welds. Ryan? Now, this is a lot of tack welding, so make sure that your skin is reasonably covered with a long sleeve shirt or welding sleeves like I've got, so you don't get that annoying sunburn. That's the tacking. Now I gotta grind it down, and then we start body work. And then do it again on the other side. Hey, welcome back to Trucks. Well, before we show you the finished metalwork on the fender, I wanted to show you what we started with. This is a brand new fender from LMC Truck for a Ford Ranger. And this is our altered wheelbase, stretched, flared, and trimmed new fender that solves a whole ton of problems. Now, our main goal here was to make this appear like it hadn't really been changed all that much the first time you look at it. But the truth is, it's been changed a ton. And here's what we changed. The easiest way to gain clearance on a fender like this is, of course, to sacrifice this lip. And trimming that, well, we gain 2 inches. And by pulling out the rest of the style line, we gain another 1/2 inch. And by doing the pie cuts across the fender, we gained another 3/4 of an inch. So that gave us, well, a little bit better than 3 inches on each side of the truck of extra clearance for our new track width. Now, the metalwork isn't perfect, but I'm very happy with how it turned out. We didn't warp the sheet metal very much, and it needs some filler. So between fillers, primers, and some blocking sessions, we're about 8 hours away from having these front fenders looking like the bedside. And that means this truck is that much closer to having paint on it, which means that it's that much closer to us being able to drive it. I know you want to see it, and I do too.
All right, while Kevin was working his magic on her custom front fenders, I had a chance to make some progress on our interior safety gear. Now, these seats Obviously just kind of floating in position and mocked up for now, but we just have to build some brackets to hold them in place. Now when we designed the cage, we wanted the harnesses to pass through the seat and attach to the harness bar at the appropriate angle. It looks like things worked out pretty well. And we've got our fire extinguisher mounted here in between the driver and passenger, convenient to get to for both, and centrally located. Same deal with the electrical cutoff switch. Just made a little mount for it. It's as simple as push button off. We've got a rear view mirror hanging, and it's a good thing we went with lightweight aluminum seats and shed a few pounds worth of sound deadener from the floor, because we picked up about 150 pounds worth of cage weight. But it's a safety item. As far as we're concerned, it's a necessity.
Today, we're back on Rolling Thunder, our supercharged 600 horsepower track-ready Ford Ranger. We're adding a custom gauge display built from the Ranger's stock gauge cluster, and we're repairing hail dents on our hood the easy way. It's all today here on Trucks.
Hey guys, welcome to Trucks. Well, we are on a mission, and that mission is to get Project Rolling Thunder out from within these four walls and out onto the road. Now, we've got a ton of stuff to do, but we don't want to gloss over all the good stuff. We want to show you guys some good, solid tech. Part of that is the paint and body process. Now, we've got some of the panels primed, but we've still got some damage here on the hood in the form of some mild hail damage. Now, we're going to show you a process today that you've probably never seen before, and it's an unconventional way to take care of damage like this. It's cool, so stick around.
Now, while Kevin's doing some pretty cool paint and body tech, I'm going to get to work installing these gauges. Now, for stage one of Project Rolling Thunder, well, we just stuck with the stock instrument cluster, and it was sufficient. But for stage two, and especially with forced induction, we not only want more accurate instrumentation, we want to be able to keep tabs on more things. Our drivetrain's gotten kind of expensive, and we don't want to risk damage because we didn't have enough information in front of us. Now, the challenge is going to be making these gauges look good within the confines of the stock dash. I guess we could get rid of the cluster and the trim bezel and just hang a flat aluminum panel and install our gauges and call it a day. But I've already gotten a little too carried away with the race car look of this truck, and we'd prefer the appearance of a stock dash. Well, somewhat stock anyway. So I'm going to install whatever gauges I can within the instrument cluster bezel. The rest will get neatly installed in the dash, with the exception of the tachometer, which will probably hang from the roll cage A-pillar tubing.
Now, the primer surfacer that you see on Rolling Thunder and a lot of the other projects here in POWERBLOCK is a product called Rust Defender by a company called Clausen. We get it from Brian and the guys at Auto Body Color and Supply, and it builds super, super thick. It even says sprayable filler right on the can. Now, the gold color is the Rust Defender, but they make a product called All You Need, which is essentially the same, just colored differently. It comes in light gray, dark gray, tan, white, and red. But before I show you the All You Need, I want to show you this. This is a typical urethane primer surfacer. It's just some overmix in the bottom of a mixing cup liner. Now, look at all the space in around that. That shows you that that has shrunk over time. And this, well, it's wasted overmix, but it shows you very clearly just how much a urethane primer surfacer can shrink back over time. Now, when your primer shrinks, your bodywork shrinks, and the sand scratches swell back through, and your paint job, your expensive paint, is going to show all of that shrinkage. Nobody wants that. But that is not the case with the Clausen products. Check this out. This is the All You Need polyester spray filler in the same type of mixing cup. And you can see there's very little space around the overmix, which is impressive. It means it didn't shrink very much, especially when you consider this has been sitting there for nearly 2 years. Now, what's equally as impressive is this. Look how thick that is. That's ridiculous. There's no way that you could ever get away with that type of mill thickness with a urethane primer surfacer without it shrinking and cracking apart, solvent craters forming in it. And this, to me, is the testimonial of what an impressive product this Clausen stuff is. Now, these products use what's in the can and a little bit of catalyst. No reducer is added, which is part of the reason that they build so well and never shrink back. And typically, you use a large fluid tip spray gun to apply this and layer it up by spraying it. The problem with that is that you pretty much need a dedicated gun with a huge orifice, 1.9, 2.0. Personally, I spray polys with a 2.3, which is a giant gun and makes it pretty much useless for any other type of painting. But today, we're going to show you how to take advantage of the huge build capability of this product and show you some alternative methods of application, including brushes, rollers, and flat out pouring it into the repair. No, we're not kidding, and here's how it works. Now, the first thing to do is clean off your surface. This is done with a simple glass cleaner. And of course, to apply primer, whether you're spraying it or pouring it on like we are, you have to abrade the surface, which means putting scratches in it, so the primer has something to hold on to. Now, we located the dents earlier by using the shiny paint and the reflective surface, but you can clearly see where the low point of the dent is when you sand over the top of it. Doing the crosshatch does two things. It literally shows me where the low point of the dent is, and it makes sure that I've got it scraped up and scratched enough to hold the primer. If you've ever done body work before, you know that there's something missing. I'm not wearing a dust mask. That's because there's no dust suspended in the air. Now, when you're mixing the rust defender, it's pretty darn easy. There's 4 quarts in the can, and there's 4 divisions on the side of the catalyst bottle. Since we're mixing only 16 ounces, I'm mixing a half of a measure of the catalyst in, just to be precise. Now, after you've thoroughly, and I mean thoroughly, mixed in your catalyst, well, you're ready for your application. And our application in this case is pouring it on with the help of a 98-cent ketchup bottle I got from the local grocery store. Now, the liquid primer surfacer, when it's poured onto the dents, is going to flow out on its own. The industry term for this is self-leveling, and it does it quite quickly, so you have to be aware that your hood is as level as possible. And what we're doing, it's not rocket science, it's self-explanatory, and you can literally see what's happening. Now, as thick as this is, it's not going to dry instantly. It's probably not going to dry in the recommended dry time. So we're going to leave this stuff overnight and come back and block it out and see how we did. Now, since we have an excessive amount of surfacer mixed, we're going to do a couple of different fun things. We're going to put our cake batter on our mirror bases. Now, there's no technique here. It's just pouring the stuff on. However, on a vertical surface like the door and the cab corner, well, we need to repair the dent with conventional filler first, and then use a different application of the surfacer. We're blocking the finishing putty with 80 grit on a soft sander. And once you're satisfied with the repair, you're already set up for your surfacer, which this time will be applied with a roller that we got from a home center for about $1.50. Now, like we said, with a vertical surface, it's a bit of a challenge, but the primer does build pretty good, even with this application. Goat number 3.
Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Well, while we give Kevin's primer a chance to dry, it'll give us a chance to tell you about the gauges we're going to be using in Project Rolling Thunder. Now, they come from Autometer, and it's their Elite series of gauges. Now, these are full sweep electric gauges, and they're not only very precise and accurate, but they're also quite functional. Take the fuel level gauge, for example. Now, typically, you'd have to match your gauge up to the resistance or ohm range of your existing fuel level sender. But with this, well, you just simply program the gauge to match what you already have, saving you time, money, and a little bit of hassle. These gauges also streamline your dash by eliminating the need for an external warning light or shift light. Say you want to know when your engine water temp hits 230 degrees. Well, you don't need to wire in a separate light or audible alarm. Simply program the gauge to change colors, one of the 7 available colors, at 230 degrees, and you'll notice out of the corner of your eye that the gauge face has changed colors and your engine's starting to get hot. Now, the tack is cool as well. It's got 3 stages of lighting. Say, for the sake of argument, our engine's got a rev limit of 6,000 RPM, but we want to know a few hundred RPM ahead of time that we're getting close. So we program it at 5,700 and 6,000 RPM. 0 to 5,700, gauge face is going to be green. When we hit 5,700, it turns amber. And at 6,000 RPM, it turns bright red, letting us know time's up and we better grab another gear. And the best part about all this stuff is you don't have to take your eye off the road or the track. At speed, things happen very quickly, and the more you can keep your eyes up, well, the more you see and the more aware you are. Now, just a few screws hold the one-piece clear plastic lens and black gauge bezel to the instrument cluster. Then we popped out the gauges themselves, which are just kind of pressed into the housing. And with that done, we can flip it over and remove all the warning and indicator bulbs and rip off the printed circuit. It's just not necessary. Then we simply made a cardboard template and marked which side faces up. And here's how the aluminum panel will fit over the cluster, but we've clearly got a problem because the gauges need room to recess into the cluster, so we're going to have to make a little bit of a modification. So I just use a small drill bit to locate the approximate center of the gauges and the clearance they're going to need. Then I could use a hole saw to open things up a little bit. Now these probably aren't going to be opened up enough, but the plastic's easy to work with and I can go back later and trim as needed. Well, that looks kind of destroyed. That's what we want. We just need this plastic chassis. Now the cool thing about a project like this is that the gauge style, the material you use, and the gauge layout is all up to you. All right, with that done, we're gonna run into our second problem, and that is, well, obviously, we need to remove the trim bezels for the factory gauges, and we've got to get rid of the clear plastic, because, well, these have clear plastic on them themselves, and we need access to the programmable buttons. So, after quickly removing the clear plastic lens, we could get to work modifying the gauge bezel. Now what I'm doing is using a razor blade to create a score in the plastic, deep enough so when we go back with a pair of pliers, it'll give us a nice clean break and we can get rid of the excess. What we end up with is exactly what we wanted. All right, well there they are. Now we still have some work to do to finish mounting the gauges, and we obviously have to finish wiring them up, but you get the gist of it. And I gotta say, I'm really happy with the way they turned out. They've got a nice clean appearance, the gauges are in a stock location so you know you can see them easily, and they've still got an aftermarket or racy look to them, which I think is kind of cool. Now you can do this whether you're working on a late model truck like we are, or if you're working on an older pickup truck and you want to combine stock instrument cluster components with accurate aftermarket gauges. As far as the mounting panel goes, well, we're just going to leave the aluminum panel raw, but you could cover it in any number of materials or paint it to match the rest of the truck. Just get creative and have fun with it.
Hey, welcome back to Trucks. Well, we let our primer surfacer sit overnight to make sure it was good and dry before we started blocking it to see how it responded to that incredible thickness. And I would say it's good and dry. Check this. Look at this one. Well, it's not coming out of there. Regardless, we've made our point, I think. The thickness of that, the ease of application, is pretty cool. Let's see how it blocks out. This is 80 grit, and this is my mirror base. I'm not going to finish this right now, but you get the point. It kind of acts as its own guide code. It's got all the attributes of this really good primer surfacer, and it took a brush to put it on. And here's the other point I wanted to make. This is all the safety gear that I had to use with this. I didn't have to use my fresh air. I didn't have to use my spray suit and the cumbersome pack that goes along with it. One more point. This is really important because everybody's thinking environmentally friendly. We did not generate an ounce of liquid waste by using this product, which would have had to go into a bucket like this and go off to our friends at Safety Clean to be responsibly and properly disposed of the correct way. So we've just saved some time, used a great product, and we were green. Let's go see how the primer did on the truck. The blocking process starts with 80 grit, just to get the heavy work out of the way and get down to the basic shape. Then I'll switch to 180 to smooth and feather the repair into the surrounding panel. By the way, here's a quick tip. Check the masking tape out on the plastic handle. That's just so I don't bang into it with a sandpaper and ruin a good part. Well, here you go. The dent is fixed, it's leveled, there's no pinholes, and another couple of stages of sanding, and I'm ready for paint. Roll on primer. Who knew? Now, because of the crown of the hood, the way it curves over, gravity was dragging my primer down. I had to make a little masking tape down to contain it. Boy, now it's like a rock. I'm using the same two steps for blocking, but remember, if you're working on a late model vehicle, most of these hoods are aluminum and they require a light touch. Now, most of these hail dents are flat out gone, filled in. This guy, well, it was a deeper dent and needs a little bit more primer. But my point is this, if you find the right products, work within the rules of the chemicals, well, you can make your weekend paint and body projects a whole lot simpler and work smarter, not harder.
Hey guys, well, we've had a chance to finalize our gauge layout. We've got our tack hanging from the A-pillar, we've got our stock instrument cluster loaded up with aftermarket gauges, and we've made up an aluminum panel to house the remaining gauges that wouldn't fit in the stock cluster. Now the tack is just temporarily zip tied in place, But when we do the final installation, we'll either bolt it down or go with something a little bit more substantial. And while the tack isn't directly in the line of sight of the driver, well, it's not far off. And with the multi-stage shift light built right into the face of the gauge, we shouldn't have any problems figuring out when to shift. Now, to make room for the gauges in the center of the dash, well, we just got rid of the CD player. After all, we've got a supercharged V8 and a healthy exhaust system to listen to, so we can make all the music that we want to hear with our right foot. And we saved a couple of pounds in the process. Now, we've got our gauges divided into two groups, what we're calling Priority 1 and Priority 2 gauges. The ones we can see more clearly are our Priority 1 gauges, and they're the things that have a detrimental effect on the life of our engine. Things like oil pressure, oil temperature, water temp, and our air-fuel ratio, along with the necessary speedometer. And these are the things we really want to keep tabs on. Now, over here, we've got the gauges that are a little less important. We've got fuel level, boost level, and our voltage. Now, both of these gauge panels have room, so we can add on indicators or LEDs for our turn signals, high beams, and our check engine warning light. Because after all, we're going to be able to plug in a scanner and communicate with the PCM just like you would on any other OBD2 equipped truck.
With the hail damage on the hood fixed, a couple other whiskey nicks or pop knots on the doors repaired, and our mirror base is fixed and primed, all with a rather unconventional method, this truck is that much closer to being prepped for final paint. And let me tell you what, that is a major milestone for any project. Not to mention Ryan's awesome work on the cage, gauge placement, and all the other details that we've done with this truck, trying to make it something we could really be proud of. And hopefully, it'll live up to the rendering that Steve Longacre created and the name, Rolling Thunder.
Today, Kevin's taking his prized Christmas cozy blankie and turning it into a hardcore custom race truck front bumper. Then we're gonna install it on Project Rolling Thunder, our 600-plus horsepower, street-legal, racetrack-ready Ford Ranger. It's all today.
That's life.
Here on Trucks.
Hey, welcome to Trucks. Well, I know that you or somebody in your family has gotten one of these for a gift. And you don't want to hurt the feelings of the person that got you this gift, but you don't really know what to do with it. Well, don't worry, I'm gonna help you out. Because today, we're gonna show you how to make this out of this. I'm not kidding.
Yeah, well, while Kevin's turning his highly coveted Christmas gift into a custom bumper, I'm going to be doing something else. Anything else. Maybe painting this frame. I just hope he's wearing more than his birthday suit under that thing. Whew.
Well, to answer that question, yes, I am fully clothed underneath my super comfy Christmas present. And to get it right out of the way, right from the start, our custom bumper is made with a combination of fiberglass and fleece. And the end result is a custom molded bumper with an aerodynamic shape, a cool little kick out here, and enough real estate to house the APR carbon fiber inlets for our brake cooling ducts, as well as maybe even some real estate for some kind of a fog light down the road. And all of it is bathed in the high build polyester surfacer that you've seen us use quite a bit here on POWERBLOCK. And it all starts with a stock bumper and a wireframe. Now, the stock bumper is a stamped steel upper combined with a plastic lower, and it didn't really have the look we want. We looked through a bunch of catalogs, and we still didn't find anything that would suit the rest of this truck, especially the custom bodywork. So, it's Trucks. We decided to make our own. And of course, it starts with a stock bumper, and then I built a wire form to give the shape that I wanted. And I did this while the bumper was on the truck to give me the ground clearance I needed and the overall shape. You could stand back, kind of scope it out and look at it and really perfect your design. But I didn't start with a 1/4-inch steel rod. I started with TIG wire. You can see pretty much exactly how this thing kind of fell into place. The TIG wire is easy to bend, and I could experiment, and I could do a bunch of different shapes and see where it started and just MIG weld it together and easily come up with my form. And then transfer these shapes onto the 1/4-inch rod. The 1/4-inch rod is a little bit difficult to bend, and it's not nearly as forgiving as the TIG wire. So let's talk about that. By the way, a coat hanger works great for the same type of a project. It's easy to bend, and they're cheap. You can do pretty much any shape you want. I stole a bunch of Ian's TIG wire and I like the straightness of it. But we ended up using 1/4-inch steel rod because it's the same steel rod we use on the fenders and the bed sides to make the inside radius and to build the strength back into the panel. So kind of a common theme. But there's a lot of different thicknesses and different types of stock available to you. For instance, 7/16 and 1/2 inch. But as they get bigger, they get heavier. So the compromise was 1/4-inch gives us the weight and the ease of construction that I was looking for to make this project. But like we said, the steel rod is a little more difficult to bend. That's where Matco comes in because they've got some nice tubing benders available. This guy has longer arms and you can bend up to 1/2 inch diameters. This is what you typically use for brake lines, and it works good for the steel rod too. Got to man up a little bit though. You can, but it's probably not the best. Oh, there we go. It's a bit of a challenge. So you can imagine making that radius by hand. It's a little bit more difficult to do. However, you can get it done with the tubing benders. But if you don't have them, here's an inexpensive way to make some simple forming dies. If you've got a C-clamp and something round, you can rock and roll. This, for instance, is a pulley off of the 4.6 that we pulled out of the Ranger to put the new illuminator in. And it's obvious what you can do. You can literally use it to pull your forms around. Even when it's coat hanger or TIG wire that you can easily bend by hand, you can use this guy to make a smooth radius that's perfect rather than one of these that's going to be inconsistent. So it's a great tool whether you have the tubing benders or not. Here's another thing to remember. You saw me bend this with the tubing bender, but if I try and do it on my homemade die, I can't do it. So here's where you can use leverage. It's simple physics. We've just got a longer piece of the same stock, and I can use the leverage and easily bend around like so. I can make a nice consistent radius that way. So keep that in mind when you're trimming pieces. You might waste a little with the longer stock, but you're going to get the radius and the bends that you want. So now that you know how I got my wire form in place, I've got a little bit of prep work to do before I put my super casual couch potato suit to much better use. Hey, welcome back, where we're showing you how to make a custom front bumper out of some rather unconventional materials. Now, I've got all the metal prepped with 24 grit, which is very aggressive. But we need a good, strong mechanical bond. Well, here's the big secret. The reason this thing is so comfortable and flexible is because it's made out of fleece. And fleece has the amazing property to where you can stretch it and it retains the shape of what you're stretching it over. That's why guys doing pro audio projects use fleece, stretch it around wood forms, and it retains the shape once you add the fiberglass resin. Those guys use staples. We can't put staples in the metal bumper, so there's some other supplies and materials that you're going to have to use. Obviously, you're going to need some kind of fiberglass resin. We just got this from the local auto parts supply store, and it usually comes with its own catalyst. Now, I've got this giant nut and bolt and some unwaxed dental floss. Hang in there. I'll explain what this is about later. Scissors to cut the fleece. Little single-edge razor blade helps to get in some tight corners, and disposable brushes, since the resin is pretty much going to make these useless after it sets up. You can use clothespins to hold things in place. However, they don't hold much tension, so we're going to use these binder clips. You can get these at any office supply, and they're stronger and they'll hold more tension than these guys. Now, this project is not quite as messy as working with traditional fiberglass matting. However, it's fiberglass, it's messy, so glove up, protect your skin. Now, this is a pretty fun body shop project, and it's really forgiving. The fleece doesn't really care which orientation you lay it down. You're kind of sneaking up on it and pinning one side to stretch the other side. It doesn't take a whole lot of force, but using multiple clamps gets you an even tension and a more even shape. What I found worked best for this bumper was to pull in opposite directions. For instance, we've got the top or the bottom, now we're working side to side. In particular, the inside of our air inlet as opposed to the outside of the bumper edge. And the beauty of fleece is that it conforms around corners, and you can really dictate the shape that you want just by stretching it in different directions. Now here's where the unwaxed dental floss comes in handy. Basically what you're doing is opposing the tension that you've created in the wire form. I'm tying it at one end and weighting it down with a giant nut and bolt on the other end. It's pretty obvious what it's doing. It's creating my cool little kick out. Now the unwaxed part of the dental floss allows the resin to permeate the floss instead of sitting on top of it, so it literally becomes part of the bumper when you apply the resin. The mix ratio for your fiberglass resin and catalyst is obviously on the side of the can, but if it's really hot, you want to put a little less in. If it's very cold, you want to put a little more in. The point is mix it thoroughly once you've got your catalyst added to the resin. Now this is the fun part, and there's really no skill or talent involved in this. You're simply brushing the fiberglass resin onto the fleece. Be careful, of course, not to put too much on and disturb the shape. Now, if you wanted to, you could put it in a large orifice spray gun and spray it on. I just find it's a little more therapeutic to do it this way. Okay, we let the resin set up for a couple of hours. Now we're going to try and take some of these clips off. And sometimes you get lucky and they just pop right off. Now these clips are thankfully cooperating. However, if you can't get them out of the resin mix, don't worry. They can be ground down flush and covered up with filler, since we are going to be using filler for the final shape. Okay, we've got a couple lumpy transitions here that we're going to smooth down with a grinder. This is the reason for the heavy-duty 24-grit scratches in the steel. It allows the resin to make a nice mechanical bond and stick to the bumper. We'll take care of the rest of that with some filler. Hey, welcome back. Well, it's taking shape. It's looking like a bumper now. So the next step is to cut the hole for our cool carbon fiber air inlet duct for the brake cooling vent. We got these from APR, and since they're universal, the same size hole goes on the other side, and that starts making a template. Now this is the same basic principle as doing a mirror image of a graphic on a paint job, like a flame job. I've crimped the edges so I know where my paper wraps around the ends, and I'm simply using a spray can instead of a pen to mark the shape of the hole from the backside. We take that, transfer it to the other side. In swapping it over to the other side, I'm also flipping it upside down so we have a literal mirror image. Using the sides that I folded over to mark, as well as some masking tape, and locating it in just about the same spot. I say just about because it's not really rocket science that we're working with here. I want to get it close and then eyeball it and then make my final adjustments as I sneak up on it. Now rather than run a pen around an inconsistent edge, I'm using the spray can again because it gives me a ballpark idea of where I'm going to start trimming. The marker just gives me a clearer idea of where to cut when I'm trimming for the opening. One final check with a measuring tape and comparing it to the other side lets me know that our template is exactly where we needed it to be. Yep, we're in the ballpark. I'm actually using an angle grinder and a 36 grit cutoff wheel to trim the opening. The fleece is thin and it's soft, and this gives me more control around a radius. Here's where the inlet scoop itself becomes a template. I'm simply using a marker and marking the holes precisely where they should be. I start off with an 1/8 inch drill bit and make the hole slightly larger. This side fits. Gonna build that up a little. Now since the inlet duct is flat and the surface of our bumper is curved, we need to build up the edge just a little bit for a more flush fit. I'm using a fiberglass reinforced filler made by Clausen that we picked up from our friends at Auto Body Color and Supply. Before the filler sets up completely, I'm shaping it with 36 grit paper. This allows me to move quickly and easily and establish the shape that I want. The fiberglass makes it strong. There we go. Now here comes the tedious part of auto body repair, which is basically using filler and blocking and filling and blocking and filling and blocking again. Keep in mind though, with this project, the fleece establishes the shape. all we're doing is a thin skim coat of a finishing putty, no more than a 1/16 and maybe an 1/8 of an inch thick. I'm using 80 grit paper to block it out and really just refining the shape, filling in any cracks or pinholes that may be there, and quickly getting it ready for primer surfacer.
Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Well, while Kevin was eating popcorn and lounging in fleece, I had a chance to completely coat the frame of Project Rolling Thunder with POR. And in the areas where I couldn't get a brush, I'm just touching it up with some rattle can spray paint and get rid of the rust color on the inside spots. Now, we didn't end up with a show car quality finish because we brushed this stuff on, but that's not what we were after. We wanted something tough, something that could stand up to the rock chips. And this truck sits kind of low, it's gonna see plenty of them. Plus, POR is easy to touch up. Now, speaking of which, we didn't leave any bare metal to weld the coilover mounts to. That's no big deal. When the time comes, we'll grind it down to bare metal, weld in the new mounts, brush in some POR, blend it in, make it look nice, and call it done. And with the frame completely coated, we can finally start the final reassembly of this truck. Now, hanging off the front of the Ranger is something we haven't shown you before, and it's the mounting bracket for the heat exchanger to cool the supercharger. And it's just small diameter square tubing, 20 gauge sheet metal bent up, and it's attached to the body with rib nuts or nutserts, so it's removable. And with it sitting down nice and low, well, it's not going to interfere with engine cooling or the radiator, and it'll be protected by Kevin's custom-made bumper that he used a genderless man robe to make.
Now, this is just a mock-up. We haven't really started assembling yet, but we wanted to show you what the bumper looks like. One thing we haven't showed you is the air inlet opening for the heat exchanger. We didn't want to leave it exposed, so we used another scrapped Ford Ranger grill and just made the insert fit the opening. It just screws in from the back with some tabs we added. So we've got about 12 bucks worth of fleece, about $6 in the office supply binder clamps. We used about 10 bucks worth of fiberglass resin, about $10 worth of filler, and about 30 bucks worth of this high build primer surfacer. The most expensive thing on this bumper cover were the carbon fiber inlet ducts at about 200 bucks for the pair. So all told, we've got about 275 bucks in this bumper cover. Now, if we wanted to go all race car crazy, we could send this off to a carbon fiber shop and have them use it for a plug and make us a carbon fiber bumper that looks exactly like this, but weighs about 3 pounds and costs about 3,000 bucks. So for 275, well, we've got a cool custom bumper that serves all of our purposes, including carbon fiber inlet ducts for our brake cooling ducts and lots of air coming in for our heat exchanger so our supercharger doesn't overheat. And the highest cost of this whole bumper cover was actually my dignity at the beginning of the show. Hey, that's life. Hey, welcome back to Trucks. Today's the day. Project Rolling Thunder, final assembly. All the body work's done. It's in high build primer. 95% of the fab work is done. Most of the parts are here. So it's time, and we're happy about it. There's still a couple of things that we're going to do today, though. For instance, these are the slugs that have established our ride height right from the start. Well, obviously, our coilover suspension is not quite complete, but we have to fully assemble the vehicle and get corner weights to properly gauge the spring rates and even the spring length. So that's one of the projects we're going to do today. So stick around. It's going to get fun. It's going to look like a truck.
An 03 Mustang Cobra provided the independent rear suspension that we're using on our Ranger. Now, grafting it into the frame rails took a little bit of work, but it's in there good and solid with 6 bolt-in points, as opposed to the factory 4 points of attachment. Now, up front is our custom front suspension using factory 5 lowers and circle track uppers. The brakes are from Ford Racing, and they ought to do a pretty good job of slowing down this Ranger. Now, the brakes sit on late 90s Mustang spindles. And that's also the same make and model that provided the steering rack. Now, the steering rack does have adjustable bushings from Maximum Motorsports, so we can try to dial out any bump steer issues that we may have.
Now, one of the benefits of having a body-on-frame vehicle is access to the plumbing. And the brake line that we've sourced from Summit Racing was a bulk line that comes in a spool and was hand-bent and straightened to meet our application. The fittings are AN adapter fittings from Russell, and we've also plumbed in a proportioning valve for brake bias adjustment. Ryan also drilled and tapped the frame to accept the clamps for permanent installation. Out back, our fuel cell, custom made by Rick's Tanks, drops into place. The transmission crossmember was custom made to fit our application, and we made it removable for easy access if we ever have to do any maintenance. The whole engine and transmission assembly drops into place, and this shows the beauty of mock-up. Yes, you're going to take it apart 100 times, but when it goes back together the final time, it's easy. And just in case you forgot, this is a Ford Racing 4.6 at about 650 horsepower.
Now, the heavy battery was relocated to the back of the truck, mainly for weight distribution purposes. Because every pound we can take off the front of the truck and put over the rear wheels will only help plant some of that 650 horsepower. Now, the battery cables themselves are lightweight cables. They're aluminum strands coated in copper to save weight. Our positive cable routes to the cutoff switch inside the cab, and the ground strap simply bolts to the frame. We'll leave the ground loose just in case till we get everything hooked up, and then we'll connect it. That can just dangle there for now.
The drive shaft is custom made by Denny's and is more than capable of handling the horsepower, torque, and RPM of our application. The larger diameter is to increase strength, and the lightweight aluminum construction is to decrease the rotating mass. The drive shaft safety loop may be a little redundant with the crossmember right there, but it also keeps the track officials out of our hair. The fuel lines are routed to the custom 4Precision fuel pump and connected with AN fittings into the Russell braided nylon line. The AN fittings allow us to easily serve as fuel filters and break the line up to where we can route it through the frame rail, which is hollow, but a little bit of a challenge with it fully boxed. So we cut an access hole right behind the engine and routed the fuel lines up to the back of the rails from there. If you're doing this at home, make sure that your route is clear with no obstructions so you don't damage the fuel line. Hey, welcome back to Trucks. Today, it's final assembly for Project Rolling Thunder. And with most of the chassis assembled, now we're going to drop the body on and simulate as much actual vehicle weight as possible so we can measure the corners and get our coilover suspension ordered. But before we do that, I wanted to show you something up front here. Now, installing this supercharged 4.6 into any other vehicle other than the one it was designed for is a challenge. I know this well because I'm building an early Mustang at home in my shop and pretty much have tried to stuff this same configuration in it. I got away with it because I'm using an aftermarket Schwartz chassis, and I was able to keep the original belt configuration. However, we had to do something here because the alternator sits right about here where this upper suspension point is. So we've relocated the alternator down here where the original AC compressor pump usually goes, and saved ourselves this real estate here, which is nice. Presented another problem though. So basically what we did to solve that problem is completely simplify the SERP belt drive that powers the supercharger. We've now got a single idler and single tensioner and shorter than stock belt. And with the amount of contact around the upper pulley for the supercharger, we should have no belt slippage.
All right, with our True Forged wheel and BFG tire combo on, all we've got left is to add our exhaust system, and we're going to have a complete rolling chassis and drivetrain. And then we can get started adding parts to the interior of the cab, and we'll have this thing closer to final weight.
Now these Ford log-style manifolds flow really good, ask any Cobra guy. But we had ours sent to nitro plate for ceramic coating inside and out that looks great and keeps the heat out from under the hood. We were able to reuse the downpipes from the Stage 1 Marauder swap, but the new MagnaFlow stainless steel system gets bolted up to an existing cross member. And it fits great, but boy, it's tight. We got clearance in the universal joint?
Oh yeah.
Woo, that's close. It's clear though.
Quarter inch.
We also had our side exit exhaust tips coated and nitro plate, since they were a mixture of mild carbon steel and stainless. These get installed temporarily. What do we do without zip ties?
I don't know. What did the world do prior to zip ties? I know they hung down a little bit. That's probably about right. Yeah, that looks cool. Now you guys haven't seen the completed interior. We finished things off by spraying some lizard skin sound insulation and then covering it with some Duplicolor New Ford Gray spray paint. Now our 5-point harnesses have 5 points of attachment to the vehicle or the roll cage. We've got 2 shoulder straps that wrap around the harness bar and get triple wrapped to the bar, 2 lap belts that get bolted to either side of the seat, and a 5th strap called an anti-submarine strap that will pass through a hole in the seat and get bolted to the floor. Now we use double shear mounts and plenty of Loctite at all harness attachment points. Now you guys that haven't dealt with multi-point harnesses before might be wondering, what do I mean by triple loop these harnesses? Well, it's just that. It's 3 passes through the adjuster. We're already through once. We went around the harness bar. We're going to pass through the adjuster one more time. This is where you might make the mistake that, well, that's good enough. There's no way that's going to come loose. But in a high G impact, well, that could be enough to draw this loose, and you could find the dashboard. Not cool. So you take the belt, pass it back through the adjuster, which can be kind of snug, fold it over the back, and now it's locked in and triple loop.
Now, since there's no adjusters on these seats, the placement was carefully thought out and mocked up several times before choosing the final placement and tying them into the roll cage. Besides, the padded seat covers will give a certain level of comfort as well.
Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Well, we've got a complete rolling chassis and we're just about ready to drop the body back on this thing and get our overall vehicle weight and our corner weights. But before we do that, we want to measure the unsprung weight at each corner because it factors into the calculation used to determine the spring rates for our coilovers.
Looks like we're settling in at 106 pounds, roughly. Yep, 106.
And that 106 pounds is not going to go into our spring rate calculation formula because the tire and wheel and parts of the suspension aren't supported by the coil spring. The rest of the vehicle is, thus the term unsprung weight. Had we included that 106 pounds into the calculation, we'd end up with a coil spring that was stiffer than what we really wanted. But there's more to it than just getting corner weights. We also need to consider the motion ratio, and that's the difference in suspension travel out here at the wheel versus the amount of travel at the shock or coil spring. And you get that number by measuring the distance between the lower control arm pivot point and the coilover mount and comparing it to the distance between the lower control arm pivot point and the lower ball joint. We took some measurements, did some calculations, and came up with a motion ratio of 0.67. So for every inch of wheel travel we have out here, we're going to have 0.67 inches of travel at the shock or coil spring. Think of the lower control arm as a giant lever, and the farther the ball joint is away from the coilover mount, the more leverage it's going to have on it, and you'll need to run a stiffer spring to counter that effect. And now that we know motion ratio, well, we're still not done. Now you also need to consider the angle that the coilover shock is going to be sitting at, because you guessed it, it has an effect on spring rate as well. Now our little ride height slug here, well, it's too steep of an angle. A coilover is probably going to be a little bit more straight up and down, and will end up at approximately 75 degrees. So now you can take all those measurements and all that information and pass it on to the coilover or spring manufacturer of your choice. And you can work with them and they'll help you determine the spring rate that's appropriate for the end goal of your vehicle. In our case, we're headed more towards the racetrack side of things, so we're going to be running some pretty stiff springs and shocks. But if you're not building a track truck like we are, well, the same process applies, whether you're building an off-road buggy, a go-kart, or a muscle car. So we dropped the bed back onto the frame and rolled it and the chassis back over to the lift so we could drop the cab back on this thing and get some final corner weight numbers.
Okay, with the jack stands, we've simulated a full tank of fuel. We've got some down bars in here to complete the roll cage, the auxiliary coolant tank for the supercharger, as well as coolant, everything in here to simulate the actual curb weight. Heck, we've even gone to a welding blanket that weighs as much as the original windshield weighs, just to be fair. So for all intents and purposes, we're at full race weight, minus the coilover shocks, of course. So let's see if we can improve on that almost 63% front weight bias. So we've got a total curb weight of just over 3,200 pounds. And if you remember, this truck weighed 3,100 with the anemic 4-cylinder engine. Here's what's more impressive. We've got a 54% front weight bias. Keep this in mind too. The supercharged 4.6 that's sitting in this truck typically goes in a 3,800-pound Cobra Mustang, except we've got less weight and twice the horsepower.
Finally, here it sits at ride height and almost completely assembled. All we're missing is a windshield, installing our coilovers, and doing some last-minute plumbing and wiring. Then we can fire this bad boy up and take it to the track so it can flex its muscles. Man, this thing's looking downright sinister.
All right, fired up.
Today, we're back on Project Rolling Thunder and firing up our supercharged 4.6 Illuminator engine for the first time. And we're going to show you how to find the center of gravity of your ride. It's all today here on Trucks.
Hey guys, welcome to Trucks. Well, today is a good day because Project Rolling Thunder here, after all the work and all the time, gets fired up for the first time. Now, we're also going to show you some of the things that we've done to this vehicle since you saw it last. But just in case you're new, and just in case you need a little bit of a reminder over everything that's gone into this vehicle to get it to where it is today, let's take a little trip back in time.
Our little Mazda B2500 had its 4-cylinder 5-speed drivetrain yanked in favor of a dual overhead cam 4.6-liter engine and transmission, complete with dual exhaust sticking out the side. With that done, it was time to fire it up.
Check that. Yes, sir. Obviously, going from 4-cylinder to V8 power gave us tons more horsepower and torque. But after a few miles with this junkyard engine, it sounded like there was a little man with a hammer trying to get out of the bottom end. Heard it then.
Yeah. I think our screaming deal engine wasn't so much of a screaming deal.
Yeah. It sounded like a worn rod bearing, and a problem like that doesn't fix itself, so we headed to the house.
Now, our 32-valve, 4.6-liter dual overhead cam engine swap was a success. Just a short-lived one. But that's all right. It just gave us plenty of opportunity to upgrade to bigger and better things. Like this Illuminator, topped with a Whipple supercharger and backed by a 6-speed Tremec manual transmission, along with a whole host of other mechanical and chassis upgrades, making this pickup truck less like a Ranger and more like a Mustang. Now, a stock Mazda or Ranger frame isn't exactly the stiffest platform to build a track vehicle off of. So we added some boxing plates, complete with speed holes. Then we welded those in, along with all the cross-member junctions, to make the chassis as stiff as possible. Then we dropped in our 4.6-liter engine and 6-speed manual transmission. Followed that with the installation of an independent rear suspension out of an 03 Mustang Cobra. You don't see that every day in a truck. Then it was onto the front suspension, which we moved forward 5.5 inches for weight distribution. Speaking of which, that's why we put the fuel tank and the battery towards the rear of the truck. Better balance equals better handling. A heavy-duty aluminum drive shaft connects our 6-speed gearbox to the limited slip-equipped differential. After a little bit of plumbing, we reinstalled our ceramic-coated factory manifolds and followed that with the installation of a completely custom stainless steel exhaust system. And since we liked the side exit, well, we kept that. But this time, we went out both sides. Now, to feed the supercharger, we added the cold air intake. Now, to keep tabs on what's going on underneath the hood, we added a whole slew of gauges. And to keep us safe inside, well, we added a pretty robust roll cage, complete with race seats and 5-point harnesses. The last thing we need to do is wad this thing up on a road course and not walk away.
And along with all of the mechanical and high-performance modifications, we also did some pretty aggressive and extensive body mods, including making this out of this. We also showed you guys some really interesting and out-of-the-box ways to do custom bodywork. Check it out. Now, there's nothing wrong with the Mazda, but we like the looks of the Ranger better, so we just made it one with the help of the LMC catalog. On the bottom of the cab, we did a thick spray-on thermal coating. For the front sheet metal, we stretched the wheelbase, or just used two fenders to make one to accommodate the stretched wheelbase, and use good old-fashioned old-school welding techniques to keep the welds cool and keep our sheet metal in the shape that we intended. Out back, we welded in a custom metal roll pan for a cooler, smooth look. Now that the wheel arch was in the right place out front, we had to accommodate the stupid wide wheel and tire package. So we just did a little voodoo magic with some 1/4-inch steel rod, pie cutting the sheet metal, and testing it to make sure we could get articulation without rubbing. We wanted brake cooling ducts front and rear on this vehicle. So with some custom sheet metal work and some off-the-shelf kits, we made that happen. The air inlets on the bedside don't just look cool, they're actually styled after an old-school NACA duct, and force air in behind the rotor quite effectively. The front air ducts are fed with a ram air effect through the snuggly bumper into some carbon fiber inlets. In the bed is a cross brace that bolts into the roll cage and to the frame and is covered up by a new aluminum tonneau cover.
Up next, we're using a pressurized oil system to get our brand new illuminator ready to fire. Stay tuned.
Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Now under the hood, well, we're just about finished up. The only thing we've really got left to do is fill this engine with fluids and get a reflashed PCM installed. Now we've had a chance to get upper and lower radiator hoses on this thing, get the plumbing for the intercooler and heat exchanger taken care of, and get our supercharger drive belt on. We've also buttoned up the wiring, filled up the brake reservoir and clutch reservoir, and mounted our fuel pressure regulator to the firewall, along with running all the lines.
Speaking of fuel, we wanted to show you something that we've revised since the last time you saw it. We used to have the fuel cap mounted in this aluminum plate, and we were going to hard mount it to the bed floor, but we got to thinking, this is going to see some pretty aggressive driving and possibly some track time. And if the event happened where something bad went down, we got into a collision, well, now we've locked the bed and our fuel neck together. So what we did is just cut a larger hole in the floor, make a little neck on the fuel tank, and isolate and mount the fuel cap right here. We've got plenty of clearance around the bed floor, and we've also ensured that there's not a spark risk right at the fuel vapor contact point by using vacuum line and some weather stripping adhesive and kind of sealed it up. It doesn't look bad, and we know we're going to be safer on the road.
Now the original Cobra independent rear suspension anti-roll bar or anti-sway bar mounted on the backside of the subframe and behind the differential, but it interfered with our coilovers, so we had to lose it. What we ended up doing was recycle the truck's original front sway bar, and we've got it installed on the front side of the differential where there's barely enough room. Now we made some custom brackets for it to hang it off the frame and picked up some PosiLink end links from Ride Tech and attached it to the lower control arm's original sway bar mount. Now this sway bar is a little bit larger diameter and has shorter arms, so it's going to be even more effective than the stock Cobra sway bar at reducing body roll. Now our crate engine came to us brand new with 0 miles on it, and I'm sure it was put together with assembly lube and all that, but it has been sitting for a couple of years both in and out of the truck. And the last thing we want to do is turn the key for the first time and have metal-to-metal contact or a dry start causing a lot of engine wear. So we're going to make sure the engine oiling system is fully lubricated before we do that. We're going to be using this Goodson's pressurized pre-lubrication oil tank. Now, you guys might be a little bit more familiar with this oil pump drive shaft tool. One end hooks up to an electric drill, the other engages the oil pump, you spin it, and it circulates engine oil. But on vehicles or engines without a distributor, that's just not an option, but you still want to prime the system. Now, we've got this tank filled with a couple of quarts of Royal Purple engine break-in oil. Now all we have to do is pressurize the tank with some air and hook this line up to a fitting near the oil filter. Now step one is disconnecting and removing our Autometer oil temperature sender and installing this brass adapter. This elbow will allow us to install another adapter that we can hook the line to. After snugging down the line, it's simply a matter of pressurizing the tank with compressed air. We took it to about 60 psi.
What's that?
Then slowly cracked the line open and let the oil flow into the engine. And since our gauge is still hooked up, we can just put our eyes on it and confirm that pressure is building in the system. Now, to go with our Royal Purple synthetic engine braking oil, you guys may have noticed we're running a Royal Purple oil filter as well. And just like the oil, well, the filters are premium, and they do come at a cost premium, but there is a difference. Check this out. This is the filter element out of one of the most commonly found oil filters at the local parts store. And when comparing it to the Royal Purple filter, well, there's quite a few differences, but the biggest being the filter media itself. This is 100% synthetic and filters down to 25 microns. This one, well, it's kind of weak looking in comparison, and I'm sure it's not going to do as good a job. And while it might be sufficient for a Honda Civic with 312,000 miles on it, well, for our $8,000 crate engine, we know what one we're going with.
When we come back, we'll show you how to find the actual center of gravity on your ride. Stick around.
Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Now, we've showed you what we did for an anti-roll bar or sway bar on the rear of this pickup truck, but we haven't shown you anything up front. It's because we haven't installed one yet. Now, when selecting a sway bar for this custom application, well, we don't want to just grab one out of a catalog or go with what our buddy runs down the street. We want to know for sure so we can get the right spring rate for it. Now, there's a few key pieces of information you need to have when selecting the correct spring rate for the sway bar. One of those being the center of gravity height. Now, you've probably heard the general rule of thumb that the center of gravity height is about where the shifter handle sits or about the height of the camshaft in the engine block. But those are probably more suited for car applications. So rather than go with a general guideline, we're going to take some measurements and know exactly where it sits on this truck. Now, the first step is to get a baseline measurement of what the truck weighs at all four corners with it fully dressed and sitting at ride height. Now, the information we're really interested in is the weight over the front of the vehicle, which is about 1,826 pounds. Now, for accurate results, you need to lift the back of the vehicle at least 10 inches. We went up as high as we could with our floor jack before resting it back down on the scales. We did let the pressure off the jack, it's just there for insurance. Now, the computer program we're using wants to know the rear axle center line. Ours is 24 inches. So by lifting up the rear of the truck about 11.5 inches, we've got a new front weight of 1,851 pounds, an increase of 25. All right, now in addition to some of the measurements we've already taken, the software needs a few more bits of information, like the radius of the front tire, the radius of the rear tire, along with the total of the front vehicle weight and the rear vehicle weight with it sitting level, and again, the front half of the vehicle weight with it tilted up. With that entered in, let's see what we get. Now, there's a number of center of gravity calculators easily found online, but you may want to run your numbers through more than one just to verify you get the same results. And with all the info entered in, you let the magic box do all the boring math. Ours turned out to be a pretty respectable 21.7 inches. Our truck's wheelbase is about 117.5 inches, and we've got about a 54% front weight bias. 54% of 117.5 is about 63.5. Putting our center of gravity or center of mass 63.5 inches in front of the rear axle center line. Now, our center of gravity height turned out comparable to a lot of performance cars, which is pretty good considering we started out with a pickup truck. Now, we'll take our center of gravity height measurement, combine it with our front and rear roll center heights, our spring rates, and the specs on the rear sway bar, and we can determine the correct front sway bar. And we'll get the right one right out of the box instead of going through the expensive trial and error method. Now, this COG height measurement is also useful in a number of other suspension and automotive calculations. So if you can get your hands on some scales, it's worth doing.
After the break, we'll fire it up.
Hey, welcome back to Trucks. Well, we got the computer back from Jeff and the guys at Done Right Performance, and based on the information we sent them, mass air meter specs, injector size, etc., they reflashed the computer with a tune that's going to be good and safe to start and run. Now, down the road, we can get a full chassis tune on this thing, but now we finally get to hear what it sounds like. All right, fire it up.
Yeah.
You gotta love the sound of a supercharger, and this thing sounds healthy. But those of you who have done major projects, well, you know that there's still a bunch of work to do on this truck. We got to nut and bolt the entire chassis. There's still a front sway bar to put on. Plus, there's several adjustments that we've got to go through and tune this thing and make it handle as good as it looks. But rest assured, we are real close to some awesome seat time and hopefully making a lot of tire smoke.
Today, we're working on Project Rolling Thunder, putting our supercharged street and track truck on the dyno for some engine tuning. Then we're gonna see just how much power we're making with our 4.6 Illuminator-powered Ranger. It's all today here on Trucks.
Hey guys, welcome to Trucks. Today, we're down here at DBR High Performance in Spring Hill, Tennessee, getting ready to put the Ranger on the rollers and see what kind of power it makes. And we're gonna get it road ready with a custom dyno too.
DBR High Performance specializes in all makes and models with a focus on improving performance. And co-owner David Branson was born to run this shop.
My dad did repairs as a kid, car repairs. He had a little import shop. And I just grew up, I loved working on stuff. I loved taking something that was broken and fixing it. And I learned that I could take something that wasn't broken and make it better. And I like that even more.
The entire staff at DBR are serious hot rodders, using a get-it-right the first time approach that starts from a solid foundation of fundamental skills. That and the stellar local reputation led us straight to their front door with Rolling Thunder.
When I was in college, I worked for an import shop, just doing oil changes, minor repairs, and then out of college, I worked for a shop doing custom work, and then I worked for Mercedes-Benz for a couple years, just as a service tech.
David's version of the American dream was to open up his own high-performance shop, but nobody ever told him it was going to be easy.
Me and my business partner talked about it, prayed about it, and we finally decided to open the doors. And we've been at it for a little over 4 years and built a lot of cool stuff and had a whole lot of fun doing it. So we strictly do high performance.
Projects of this caliber don't end up at your local service station, and you have to earn the trust of your customers.
I would say 80% of our customers say we want this, and they don't know how to get there, and they use us to let them get there. This is what we want, this is our budget, how do we get there?
American muscle is definitely part of what these guys do well, but as long as high performance is in the equation, DBR is up to the challenge.
But it doesn't matter. 4-cylinder, V8, V12, boost, NA, nitrous, just going fast.
Tuning and engines are not all that happens here. DBR can tackle every aspect of a build, which has definitely helped them grow their business.
Yes, we have grown pretty substantial. It was pretty fluid the first 3-4 years, and then just this last year has been huge. We're pretty busy right now. We're about 2 months out on builds.
Now, along with the shop, the retail store is very well stocked, and what's not in-house is a click away.
DBR, this is Brian. How can I help you?
Yeah, we have a showroom full of a lot of stuff that your typical weekend racer would need. Guy at the drag strip, rebuild parts for carburetors, nitrous parts, stuff like that. We have an online website that has a little over 30,000 parts on it, from anything from a Model T to any late model car, Mustang, Camaro.
Now, we asked David if their success has inspired thoughts of future growth or expansion for DBR.
Next on the list is going to be some type of expansion. More room, more square footage.
Now, when we first called David to talk with him about Rolling Thunder, it was obvious that the project was a little unusual.
That's just cool. It's weird. It's so weird, but in a really, in a really cool way. My first reaction was a Ranger with a Terminator. I just couldn't put the two together. I just pictured like a dirty Ranger with a Terminator in it, spinning tires with rust falling off. And then once I got more educated with the project, just all the work that's been put in, the lengthening of it, the fenders, the suspension, super excited about being able to be a part of it. Can't wait to see it, actually on the track.
It's done.
We're ready?
We're ready.
First thing we did when we got Rolling Thunder was just do a basic check over the vehicle. Found a couple things we need to fix right away, got those kind of in order. Turn the power on. With John Lund with Lund Racing, we developed a calibration to get the thing started.
So we got a new mass airflow sensor on here. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, we chose to use the BA3000 from SCT. A stock meter would max out at this level. The BA3000 allows us to calibrate the vehicle correctly, and the math tables don't max out, so they don't go into the Feld tables. Once we had the thing started and running, we dialed in the idle.
Idle sounds real good.
Got the idle tuned perfectly.
Now, one of the final steps before making our dyno pull is making sure that this lab-grade lambda sensor or oxygen sensor is calibrated to the ambient air so we know we're getting good, accurate readings.
DBR even has an in-house weather station, which really helps dial in precise calibrations.
Ready to fire up?
Let's get some heat in this thing.
We're gonna start and make a pull from 2,000 to 4,000. If we like what we see, we'll go from there. If not, we'll make some changes, go from there. We kind of take baby steps. We look everything over. We look at the boost, we look at all the temperatures, we check the belts, we check the drive line to make sure everything's okay. With the help of Lund Racing, we make changes based off of what we saw, and then we make another pull, usually 2,000 to 5,000. On and on and on until we get to the rev limit of that vehicle, until it's done. So taking baby steps is a way to prevent accidents. The finished product is we have an SCT handheld that you're going to have two different tunes on.
All right, on a street and track tune, we're looking pretty good. Now he's got it set up making a lot of torque on the bottom end, and our horsepower curve looks great, and it's still rising when he shuts it down. Look at our numbers. 522 horse at the rear wheels, 525 pounds of torque, 11 pounds of boost. Rock and roll. I want to drive this thing.
The potential you have is you're barely touching the surface. We're only at 11, 12 pounds of boost. That engine, you could easily run 15 to 17 on pump gas. If there's anything that I could do differently on this build, it would probably be a bigger blower, just because I like to go fast and I like stuff big and fast. So that's about it though.
All right, now on a pump gas drag tune where he added a couple of degrees of timing, this thing responded by making 550 horsepower and 540 pounds of torque. So needless to say, well, we're beyond psyched, and we're gonna have to flip a coin or arm wrestle or something to determine who gets to drive this bad boy home.
We were very pleased with how we were able to accomplish the goal for this truck. I feel like the calibration that's in it's gonna be very safe. You're gonna get a lot of fun out of it, and there's tons of room for potential.
Hey guys, welcome back. Well, Project Rolling Thunder survived its maiden 20-mile voyage back from getting custom dyno tuned. And cruising down the interstate, well, the engine was running nice and cool, and at highway speeds, it was only turning about 1,800 RPM. Nice little cruise, until you put your foot into it. And then you better be holding on to its 550 horsepower. And since this truck's just about done, well, we wanted to share with you the final stats on this monster. We built this truck around a 4.6-liter dual overhead cam illuminator engine. That's fed by a 2.3-liter supercharger strapped to the top. Behind that sits a lightweight clutch and flywheel assembly and a 6-speed manual transmission. The rear suspension is unique to say the least. It's a beefed-up Mustang IRS. The front suspension was designed on performance trend software and then applied to the truck. Triple adjustable coilovers will allow us to dial this thing in. Some 13-inch rotors and 4-piston calipers up front ought to slow us down. Now we roll on some 3-piece true forged wheels, wrapped in some pretty sticky and pretty wide BFG G-Force KDW tires. All this adds up to just under 3,400 pounds with a low center of gravity and a respectable front rear weight bias. And finally, moving this thing down the road is a thundering 550 horses at the wheels.
Now, as bad as this truck is, believe it or not, there's room to pull more power out of this engine, a lot more. Simple things like a pulley swap, heck, even a larger displacement blower, throwing more timing at it with a higher octane fuel. But for our money, it's finally time to find the appropriate road course to really stretch this project's legs and find out what it's capable of. And I don't know about you guys, but after more than 2 years in the making, we think Project Rolling Thunder is ready. So are we. Hey, welcome back. When we first planned out Rolling Thunder, we had a definite look in mind, and we were bound and determined to pay tribute to some of the high-performance Ford vehicles in the past, the Thunderbolt cars and the Lightning pickup trucks. Even the name Rolling Thunder kind of pays tribute to that, as did the original paint scheme. It had a two-tone and a lightning bolt to separate the two colors. So we started with a black ground coat, which was the high-build primer from Clausen, and it looked black, but the problem was, every time we touched it, it scratched off and it looked like a chalkboard. It looked white. And primer, well, it doesn't have any UV screeners, so the moment we put it outside, it was going to start to deteriorate and get really ugly. So we liked the flat black look so much, we used a brand new product from the Eastwood company. It's called Dead Rat Flat Black, and it's Stealth Bomber Flat. Looks pretty darn cool. After spending a couple hours sanding the surfaces with 320 grit sandpaper and about 45 minutes worth of masking to cover up the headlights, the taillights, and all the windows, we carefully drove it into the spray booth with a little help from some friends. Hard to see when the windows are covered up. That's crazy. Dead Rat Flat Black is a single stage paint, meaning there's no clear coat that goes on top of it, although we have used a flat clear coat in the past. In a typical single-stage paint, the strength and the gloss are built into the one coat, although with this being flat, well, of course there's no gloss. The paint job we're giving Rolling Thunder is what's commonly known in the industry as a scuff and shoot, meaning that we didn't take the mirrors off, I didn't slide the bed back or remove it, and all we did was bag the wheels. If we had been using a full gloss paint, well, the area between the bed and the cab would have showed dry spray. With a total flat black, we're not even going to see it, so it wasn't worth the effort. Whether it's full gloss or flat, the rules of painting still apply. You've got to overlap each stroke and work your way up or down the panels, depending on your personal preference. The important thing to remember is have a smooth, continuous coat throughout the vehicle, and do one coat at a time. I'm using an HVLP spray gun with a 1.3 fluid tip, which produces a very fine atomization. And if you've ever painted before, you're probably noticing that my gun is really close to the surface. I've gotten used to a very fast gun speed with about 4 inches of distance between the spray head and the panel. This produces an unbelievably fine atomization, makes you work a little harder, but you get a better paint job. The biggest benefit to having this truck all one color, aside from looking like a completed vehicle, is that this is truly a top coat, meaning that when we scratch it, it's not going to scratch off white. It's not going to look like a chalkboard anymore, and it's going to look like the racing thoroughbred that we built. Hey, welcome back to the shop. Well, you guys know that I'm a professional painter, and seldom in the professional painting world do rattle cans and professional paint jobs mix. But now they can. This is called 2K Aerospray, and it combines a button that releases a catalyst into the rest of the can, gets intermixed, gives you a 48-hour pot life, and there's a variety of different colors and clears. We wanted a good, really high gloss clear on the Grand Am stripes on the fender, and we got it. Simply, with about $20 a can in expense, we didn't have to break out the pneumatic spray equipment. It was a minimal amount of masking and a minimal amount of safety equipment. Check it out, pretty cool. Now there's about a 48-hour window of opportunity to where you don't have to sand the surface, so that's what we're doing here. I'm just masking off the stripes. With the first coat of the 2K Aerospray, it's a medium wet coat, which means you're not going to see the full gloss. It dries to touch in about 5 minutes, so almost instantly we're ready for the second coat, which is applied a lot slower and a lot heavier, so you really see the gloss coming through on these stripes. Now, other than looking cool, the first thing you notice is that it looks like a different color, but as you saw, it was on exactly the same paint. The difference you're seeing is the way the light is reflected off the gloss clear and not absorbed into the flat.
It's been a long time coming. You ready?
The day has finally come.
Let's go.
Project Rolling Thunder hits the racetrack. After nearly 2.5 years of hard work, we're at Fairgrounds Speedway, Nashville, tearing it up in our supercharged street and track Ranger. It's all happening today here on Trucks.
Hey, welcome to the shop. Well, after today, the question that you guys keep asking us and that we have frankly asked ourselves, when are we going to pay off Rolling Thunder, will have been answered because we are going to the track. Now, if it looks a little bit different than it did the last time you saw it, there's a reason for that. It's actually all one color. And now it may look like primer, it's actually a top coat. This is Dead Rat Flat Black from the Eastwood Company, and it's paint. The problem with the black primer was when you scratched it, well, it would leave white marks because it was porous. This is a top coat and it's nearly bulletproof. But check out the stripes. They are a beautiful gloss black, and it's a true 2K catalyzed clear coat system. There's no color, just right over top of the flat black. And we use this. This is called 2K Aerospray. It's a catalyzed rattle can. Pretty cool product, and it looks beautiful for about 20 bucks. The other thing we wanted to show you, well, truck's got to be up on the lift.
Now, before we head out for the day, we wanted to swap out our street-type brake pads for something a little bit more aggressive. And since it's a good idea to match pads and rotors, well, we picked up a set of slotted EBC rotors as well. And they'll be a perfect match for our blue stuff pads. And this way we can minimize our stopping distance and keep our other pads and rotors kind of as a street set. And this is a track setup.
Now, we gave our buddy Dan Baker from Illumicraft a call, and those guys are famous for their street rod grills, but they also make all kinds of accent plates, emblems. So we sent them the letter type that we wanted for the Rolling Thunder logos, and this is what he sent back. This looks awesome. Now, we're going to put them on the fenders, but we're also going to put it right here on the back end of the truck because this is what most people are going to see.
Now, Project Rolling Thunder, while it is street legal, is a little too intense for a full throttle street or highway test. We needed to come to a place where we could really open this thing up and see what it could do. All right, now we're up here at a wet Nashville Fairgrounds Speedway, and this truck's only seen street miles, so we want to be cautious, give it a few warm-up laps, take it into the pits, make sure everything's good to go. Then we can suit up, hope the track dries out, and give this thing a real workout. Now, a wet racetrack, 600 horsepower, concrete retaining walls, and a freshly built and kind of expensive pickup truck usually don't mix well together. So we're taking it easy, making sure no parts fall off, and keeping one eye on the gauges before we get too serious. Now, a few warm-up laps also gives us an opportunity to get acclimated to the truck, to see how it feels when we're fully strapped in. We can get used to the brake, the clutch, the throttle, and the steering, and get a good feel for the truck and how it reacts at speed. So you can do things on a racetrack you just can't get away with on the street.
Well, so far the truck is doing great. No worries, no concerns. And we've proved that we can go in a big circle and turn left. But Rolling Thunder was built for a heck of a lot more than that. So a couple of little adjustments on the front sway bar and the brake bias. We're going to throw some curves at this thing.
Oh, look, it's all wrapped up like a Christmas present. Now, we ordered this from Summit to match our truck. And it's a cool matte black. Just like our pickup, so let's do this. Once we finished suiting up with the safety gear we picked up from Summit Racing, we were able to get a little bit more aggressive with the truck and try to tap into its 600 plus horsepower. Now, trying to put the power down after running through a puddle can be difficult, but judicious application of the throttle will put power down without making you spin out. You just got to be careful. Now, this truck is not set up for a banked paved oval. It's just not a circle track truck. It's set up more for a road course. So we're kind of limited on how much speed we can carry through the banking just based on the suspension setup and alignment. But on the flat sections of the track, acceleration, braking, and turning, well, that's where this truck shines. Now, you guys have probably noticed these aren't my work boots. They're thin-soled driving shoes, and they allow better pedal feel and feedback, letting you feel more in control of what you're doing. Now, so far, we're feeling pretty confident about our little pickup truck. Our supercharged V8 is running great and making lots of power. The suspension feels tight and predictable, and if this darn rain will hold off a little bit, maybe we can go a little bit faster.
Now, what you may not realize is that Rolling Thunder essentially, well, it's a Mustang. Same supercharged 4.6, same 6-speed transmission, about the same gears, big brakes, lots of safety gear, adjustable shocks, all that kind of stuff. But it was the only way we were going to ever get to build a Mustang on trucks, so don't tell the producers. Fairground Speedway Nashville is an 18-degree banked paved oval that's 0.6 of a mile long. And races have been run in this location since 1904. And it comes as no surprise that some of the best drivers in the world have run this track.
Patty sent Kyle here. Bobby Allison sent Davey here. He sent Clifford here. They sent Adam here, Adam Patty here. Dale Earnhardt Sr. sent Dale Jr. here. He said, go to Nashville. If you can win there, you can win anywhere. Everybody loves this racetrack.
Another guy who loves this track is Sterling Marlin, son of Cuckoo Marlin, the track's first back-to-back champion in '65 and '66. Now, Sterling's a two-time champ of the Daytona 500, a seasoned NASCAR vet, and it was cool to have him check out our truck.
Golly, what a motor.
Yeah, we shoehorned a lot in there.
How in the world did y'all get that thing in there?
And Sterling seemed to genuinely like what we have done.
I've been coming here since I was probably 2 months old. You know, Cale Yarborough and Bobby Allison, Richard Petty, and all of them watched them come off the corner here. And as a kid, you know, and it's pretty neat. To me, it's the best short track in the country. I mean, in the United States, it's the second oldest racetrack. A lot of history here. A lot of Cup champions have started here and went on the Cup and won races. So a lot of Daytona 500 champions. I think I counted one is 30-something guys who won the Daytona 500 have raced here. So it's a neat racetrack.
Now, we had a feeling the rain wasn't going to hold off forever, but the American Streetcar Series Run to Music City 2 is a rain or shine event. And sponsored by Jet Hot Coatings is the driving school that they put on the Friday before the weekend's events really get underway. Our good buddy Brian Finch and Kyle Tucker from Detroit Speed and Engineering put on the day-long school that ranges from classroom to in-car instruction. And the cool thing is you don't need a race car. You can use your daily driver because this class is about education.
That's what's so great about autocross. You don't have to have any experience and you don't have to have a high zoot car. You can bring out any car you want and run in an autocross.
And rain or shine, these guys were ready to run. And it was really cool seeing so many high-powered and great-looking cars and trucks not afraid of a few raindrops and willing to attack a wet and slick autocross course. So with the all clear from Kevin, I wiped the fog off the windshield, put the wipers on full bore, and gave it a shot. And you know what? The truck did surprisingly well. Usually with this much horsepower and rear tires this wide, it's typically a recipe for wagging the tail. But the truck was pretty much planted to the pavement. The tires did a great job of pushing the water out of the way and staying in contact with the asphalt, even through standing water. And major kudos to the guys in the yellow raincoats, willing to stand out here in the monsoon and work the course.
Hey, welcome back to Trucks, and welcome back to Fairground Speedway, Nashville. We just had to come back on a dry day because it wasn't fair to you guys and it was not fair to Rolling Thunder not to see the awesome potential of this great little street truck.
It's been a long time coming. You ready? Let's go.
Now, it was great having the Ranger here at a dry racetrack, because the last time we were here, so was Noah's Ark. And we've also made some suspension alignment changes as well. I always overcook that one. Over rotation. Now, those changes we made were increased negative camber on the front tires, which clearly didn't do anything for rear grip. I thought we had a dry track.
Leftover water.
Now, that increased negative camber will help even out front tire temperatures and even out the tire wear, which is a good thing since they're not exactly cheap. Now, this truck's got a ton of adjustability built into it. Between alignment and our triple adjustable coilovers, we can set this thing up for just about any road course. But that's what it's made for. So we won't be trying to dial it in for a banked oval.
Flat spot what?
Maybe I should have given the rear a little more grip too.
Man, this thing makes so much power. Torque in the bottom end all the way up to the red line. This thing just pulls strong.
Now, a big reason this truck handles so well out of the box is because a lot of time was spent on both suspension software and in the shop making sure that the suspension was done correctly. And playing a big part of that is Jack Hidley from Maximum Motorsports. He made sure we had the right spring rates and the shocks were valved to match. The proof is in the video, so thanks, Jack. Now, the only concern we had all day was that after a handful of hot laps, the engine got a little bit warm and took some cool down time. But other than that, the truck performed flawlessly. Now, our extended length shifter that we got from American Powertrain made shifting our Magnum T56 6-speed both precise and smooth.
Man, this track's kind of got a rough texture, and it's kind of a fine line in between grip and losing control and spinning out.
Now, this low-angle shot is in real time and gives a great perspective on how fast this truck is getting around the racetrack. Now, the track surface is rough, and putting power down after a 180 transition onto pit lane is an exercise in throttle control. Now, our BFGs are street tires, and they're doing a great job of keeping our truck planted on the track. Now, it's probably a good idea that we installed brake cooling ducts, because we were working them hard. The truck was going from wide open throttle to a foot full of brake pedal. The truck didn't have much time to cool the brakes off, cruising around the oval.
Man, this thing pulls, it just never stops. Oh, well, I hate to relinquish the driver's seat, but I guess it's only fair to give you a shot.
Now, this truck was years in the making, but after today, it's very clear to me, it's all worth it.
Hey, welcome back to KT's turn driving Rolling Thunder at the racetrack.
Ready to switch up?
Yep.
Not ready to give it up.
I won't bend it.
Just try to be nice and smooth on the transition from like fourth down into third or second up into third, just because the less you upset the truck, the better balance and more traction you're gonna have.
So far, this truck handles better than my Pro Touring Mustang.
Brake.
Now, I learned how to drive on a frozen lake in Canada, but it's a far cry from a high-banked oval. And Ryan was giving me some pointers that really helped. Competition driving is not just about going fast in a straight line. You got to pay attention to the sound of the tires and the feedback that the vehicle's giving you.
Turn in, it's gonna want it, it's gonna rotate, just let it. Yep. left, braking, braking. Yep. Now just feel it out. Yeah. Yep, third gear.
The combination of all of that raw power and a dry track can give you a false sense of confidence, but you've got to learn the balance and respect the track surface and its flaws to really get a good feel for driving at speed.
Running a little warm, running a little warm. All right, we got this thing running hot. We're gonna give it some cool down time. It'll give us a chance to go over the line a little bit, figure things out. Next time he comes back out, we can hit a little bit harder. That was good though.
We also wanted to give a big shout out to Robert and JP for volunteering their time to keep us safe here today on the track. And these guys are just one more reason to where Fairgrounds Speedway is a great place to come and race, as well as have some good seat time in the stands. Thanks, guys.
All right, I'm strapped in, I'm ready. We good? All right, let's do it.
All right, which one's the brake?
Oh, man, I'm getting out.
Now, with a couple laps under my belt and the truck at normal operating temperature, it was time to kick it up a notch and stamp down on the loud pedal just a little bit harder. And trust me when I tell you that Rolling Thunder answers the call.
Get into third when you get a chance. Braking, braking, turn in. Yep, turn in, get closer to the right side. Okay, there you go. Now just leave it there.
Now there's a lot going on and it is happening fast between what the truck and the track are telling you, plus somebody beside you feeding you real-time information and suggestions. Now it's a lot to absorb, but it's seat time, and that's the best teacher of all.
It's gonna rotate, just let it. Yep. Yep, left, left. Braking, braking. Yep. Now just feel it out. Yeah.
Now the seat time is great, but actually getting to drive on the same track as Richard Petty, Dale Earnhardt, Bobby Allison, well, that's truly an honor. And that's something we get to tick off the bucket list. Not a bad day at work.
Man, I just don't want to stop. I want to keep going around in circles. I'd like to turn right sometime, but this is awesome.
Now, Ryan's got his track license, he's had hours and hours of training, and I tell you what, it's sure nice to have somebody that can coach you through picking your line, when to brake, when to heel toe. So anytime you can take advantage of the Jet Hot Coating Schools, the American Streetcar Series, that type of thing, educate yourself. It sure is nice, and I sure appreciate it, man. Where is he? Cole.